Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Welcome to another episode of Scientology Stories. We have Claire Headley, Mark Fisher, and Janis Gillham Grady here today.
Hi, everybody.
Hello, hello.
While we're just getting fired up here, making sure we're all good. I like to put up the comments, little scroll here. Tell us where you're from, where you're watching from today. We've been doing, for the past few days, we've been trying to do lives a little bit more earlier in Mountain Standard Time so that we can pick up some folks in Australia for the start of their day and in UK for the end of their day. And that seemed to be pretty popular the last time we did it. So we figured we'd do that again today. And we're going to do the same thing tomorrow. So yeah, thanks for joining us. And yeah, we've already got, oh, perfect. We're already up to a few hundred people in here. So that's good news. You want to, Claire, you want to read out where people are coming in from?
Sure. Yes, we have hello from Lisbon. Here we go. Oh, yeah, there you go. Tumaka, thanks for joining us. And Cheyenne Calkins, Colt Lake City, Utah. Oh, nice. Very good.
I saw Melbourne, Australia.
E. Dunbar, Outer Banks, North Carolina. Nice. And Carolyn, hi from Melbourne, Australia. Thanks for joining us. Yes. Sandy Del Rey, hello from Omaha, Nebraska. Carrie Bemis, Cleveland, Ohio. Thanks for joining us, Carrie. Gary Jackson Moorhead in the house. Hey, beautiful people. Hey, Jackson. Matt Denny, hi from Chile, Norfolk, England. Thanks for joining us, Matt. Good to see you here. Dale Whitmore from Highlands Ranch, Colorado. Yay. Escaping the Cultiverse, hello from very cold and snowy Goderich, Ontario. There you go. And Mitch Brisker in the house. Hey, Mitch.
Oh, look, we were just talking about you, Mitch. Look what I just showing off here.
I was raving about your book, Mitch.
Yeah, we were all talking about your book and all the stories in there of all the stuff that happened after we left.
Yes, everyone watching, if you haven't gotten a copy of Mitch Brisker's new book, definitely do so. I'm in the middle of reading it. I can't wait to talk with you about that, Mitch, hopefully. Oh, Diana Johnson. Okay. Hi from Pittsburgh. Linda. Hey, all. Greetings from Hollywood, Florida, San Francisco. Thanks for joining us. Purple Groovy 69. Hello from St. Louis, Missouri. St. Louis City, Missouri. Japan of Green Gables. A joke. What do you call a group of 2 or more Scientology imp-based security chiefs? A very Jackson Moorhead. Okay.
I think I saw that on Discord the other day.
Oh, really?
Alex is here too.
Oh, nice. Hey, Apostate Alex. Thanks for joining us. Catherine Olson. Yay. Hi, everyone. Thanks, Catherine. You're an amazing moderator. Thanks for being here. Love Food Kitchen at Laughton Fox waving from across Brighton. Nice.
Nice. Wow, that's awesome. We got a ton of people in here.
Yes.
This video is actually based off of a comment on the Blown for Good channel. And I just wanted to put that up and read that. And that's why we're here today. If you have ideas for videos you want to do, put it in the comments. And sometimes I'll read it and we'll do it. It said, it's Jake JB 2360 about a week ago. He said, I would really like to find out more about L. Ron Hubbard's houses and offices. Like, do they really set his clothes out and keep his automobile running as if he is alive and here? And where are Dave's houses and how do they compare? And I really love this idea. And that's what I think I said in the comments. I said, I love this idea. Look for this on the channel soon. And then he wrote back, I will look forward to it. Thanks for the addicting info. So, when we were, so I was at the base from 1990 to 2005. How long were you there, Claire?
1991 to 2005.
Okay. And when I say base, I mean the INT Scientology headquarters in Gillham, Hot Springs, California. And then Janis and Mark were also at that property, but they were there for many years before us and also in the Sea Org for many years before us. And essentially, as soon as I got there, like I got there in May of 1990, and you guys buggered out in August of 1990.
Yes,
August and September, yeah, for me.
Yeah, so they were our
crossover, ships in the night.
Yeah, our crossover was just a few months, but But fortunately for me, Dave talked about you guys all the time after you left. So we got to kind of hear some stories about you. And at least I could get the sense and the idea that you guys had been there for a lot longer, many more years before that. So Janis, how long, when did you get there? And then how long, like in the Sea Org? And then how long were you at the base?
Well, the Sea Org, I went in January 1968.
Okay.
At 11 years old.
Yeah.
And then I lived on the ship for nearly 8 years when we moved to America in 75. And then I moved out west in 77 when La Quinta was set up. And then in the end of 78 was when we moved to the Gold Base. After having done a movie shoot there, we ended up buying it, having found out it was in bankruptcy. So that became our summer headquarters. So I moved there just before Christmas in 78 and was there until August 1990 when I took off.
Wow. Okay. And then what about you, Mark? How long were you in the Sea Org, and then how long at the base?
I joined in 1976. David Miscavige was my roommate. He had just dropped out of high school the month before. He was 16 years old. I just graduated high school. I was almost 18 years old. And then I went to the internet. I was in Clearwater up until 1981. And then I went to the international base for the first time in Gold for training. And then eventually I was up there full time starting in 1982 until I left in September 1990.
Wow. Okay. So we have, okay, good. So this is we've assembled, I believe, an ideal group of people to answer the question.
We're an ideal org.
How did L. Ron Hubbard live his life, and what did he have? Because when Janis says she was in the Sea Org at the time period that she said, that the only Sea Org was with L. Ron Hubbard. There wasn't a lot of Sea Orgs floating around that weren't having to deal with L. Ron Hubbard on the ship that he was on. And you were in the sea. So I'd say out of all of us, I think Janis has the most sea time of her Sea Org career.
Not to mention the fact that she worked daily with L. Ron Hubbard 6 hours a day, 7 days a week, all through her teenage years. She was
for 11 years.
Yeah.
Wow. So we're going to get the L. Ron Hubbard perspective pretty, I say we're going to be pretty dead on. And then between all four of us, we all worked with David Miscavige directly for many years, individually in different capacities in different organizations. So we would be familiar with his stuff as well. And when we were there, when Claire and I were there, she was in Religious Technology Center. So she was in David Miscavige's organization. And then, and he was sort of between 1990 and the 2000s. That's when he sort of embraced this, I can do whatever I want kind of attitude. So, but let's start with L. Ron Hubbard. So when you were first showed up, Janis, L. Ron Hubbard, he had the St. Hill house. He had the
manor.
Yeah, this manor where he lived
in East Grinstead in England. I showed up in 66, and yeah, he had the manor. There was a nursery quarter with 4 rooms where the children all lived. They each had their own room. He had his own room. Mary Sue had her own room. He had an office. She had an office. There was a big kitchen. They had a cook, and Ken Urquhart was his butler.
Okay. Wow.
Okay. Yeah.
Oh, your focus went off for a second, Janis. I don't know if it's autoing or something, or if you have to touch it.
I don't know. I don't know how to fix it.
Okay. It's fine.
Anyway, so they had a nanny who looked after the children, and Mary Sue had a steward or someone that helped her. And then Hubbard had his butler, and they had John Henry, the cook. And that was it.
So how many people do you think total was taking care of L. Ron Hubbard, or like tending to him?
Well, tending to him personally was just Ken, and then he had a communicator, Bill Carino, who he worked with. A handful
of people between the cook,
a handful
and the
of people,
and
yes, and when he went to Rhodesia, he traveled on his own to Rhodesia, and he would travel first class.
Mm-hmm.
And then when he was in Las Palmas later on, he had one person with him. It was Virginia Downsburg and later on my mother.
And when you guys were
And
in Las Palmas, was that a house or was that what was that?
it was a house. I never saw it because it was before my time.
Okay.
I showed up on the Royal Scotsman in January of 68. And my mother had already been in the Sea Org, and she'd been on the Avon River and then also working in the house. Now, on the Avon River, he had a room, a captain's quarters. And that was, that was cleaned up. And the flag order, don't unmark a working installation, was because my mother took the porthole off in order to clean it, and she needed help putting the porthole back on and shouldn't have removed it in the first place. But he just had a cabin and he ate with the crew, or sometimes food would be taken to him in his cabin. And he would be served by this Commodore steward, his tab. That's what he drank at the time. That's like a Coca-Cola type of drink.
He used to drink tab.
Yeah, he used to drink
Oh,
tab.
Awful tasting stuff.
Yeah.
It's worse than Diet Coke, which I love Diet Coke, but tab was awful.
I remember tab. Oh boy.
Yeah.
Wow.
Anyway, so that was his quarters on the Avon River, and I did sail with him once on the Avon River. We lived on the Royal Scotsman, but we did a second mission into time, and I was the messenger picked to go with him. So I got to sleep on a hammock in the forecastle.
And that was one of those treasure hunting missions.
Yes.
He was going to recall where he'd buried treasure in a last life or where it was stashed, and then you guys would go and retrieve it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Wow.
So now on the Royal Scotsman, I was on that from January until May, and he was not aboard. He was on the Avon River, and then he was at a house in Marseille.
Okay.
And I never went to that house in Marseille. But then he came back to the Royal Scotsman. He'd been on it when it was originally purchased in November, but he came back in May, and his quarters were set up where the smoking room on the prom deck was turned into his research room, as in his office.
Okay.
And that was a nice big room sitting midships on the ship at the very top. And then if you go down the stairs and over to the port side on A deck, there was 2 staterooms. One was Mary Sue's and one was his. And each stateroom was the size of 4 regular cabins on the ship.
Okay.
And they each had their own little toilet room and a shared bath shower, which had doors going into it. Then he had a cabin for an auditing room. Later on, it was decided, because all his books were in storage, to take 4 cabins next to his stateroom and turn that into an auditing room and library.
Okay.
So he had his stateroom, and then he had his library, and upstairs he had his research room. Now, working with him, he had a steward and an assistant steward and a cook.
Okay.
And then he had Ken Urquhart as his communicator, checking all the traffic before it went into him. And the steward took 2 cabins for laundry rooms to do the ironing and to put his clothes and that type of thing, because he didn't keep his clothes in his stateroom. There was really no room. And so it was all just hung up. The bunk beds were taken out and lines were put up, and his clothes were hung there and ironed in there and washed in there, washed in the sink. We didn't have a washing machine. Everything was hand washed.
Yeah.
And
was he crazy about the chemicals and the smell stuff back then too?
Not at that time.
Okay.
And at that time, he used to shower with Pear soap. And every time he'd come out of his cabin in the morning, and I'd go reporting for duty, sir, and then he would go up the stairs together. I could smell the Pear soap as I'd follow him up the stairs.
When you say pear, you're talking about the fruit.
Yes,
brand.
and it was a brand called Pear soap, made with pear, and I could always smell that as I would follow him up the stairs.
Wow. Well, because for those of you who don't know, in the Sea Organization, anything with any sort of fragrance or perfume or any smell is forbidden for use in the Sea Org. So your shampoo, your conditioner, your deodorant, your lotion, anything that you need to put on your person is not allowed to have perfume in it. And you can't wash your clothes or wash your hands with any sort of soaps or detergents that have any perfume in them.
Yeah, they had to be
That's all.
unscented.
Right.
And that's
And you know, I don't remember him having a problem with the smells until more like 73 when he came back from New York.
okay.
Before that, I don't remember it as being such a big deal, and we didn't have to rewash and re-rinse all his shirts and move over to coconut soap and natural soap with no smells and stuff like that. I don't remember that being like that earlier.
Huh. So something happened in New York that he
Yeah.
or it came up in his research, because in the perfume thing, he talks about how they used perfumes to sort of help implant people and to
Yeah, I called it, it was rose
Psychiatrists.
perfume. Everything had rose
Right.
perfume in it.
Yeah.
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 Right.
Even when you bought something, it was perfumed. You know what I mean?
And it was
Yeah.
blamed
And
on psychiatrists on the whole trek that they
Yes.
used
Yeah.
perfume to trap people.
Yeah.
And his temper, I mean, he'd get really wound up over these smells, you know, and I'm you know, he smoked. So
That's
I
right.
could smell
He
the
smoked
cigarette
like a
smoke,
chimney.
you know,
Yeah.
but he's still having problems with all these perfumes and these different smells. And, you know, sometimes it's like, go find that smell and we got to run off and, oh, it's coming from a restaurant on the dock, you know,
Oh,
because,
that's a
you
good
go,
one.
you're smelling
That's a
all the
good one.
vents. And,
That's a good one. I like that. That's like a, yeah, we tracked it down. It's there's a big fat fellow over there that's wearing a lot of aftershave, you know, just like, okay, we can't do anything about that.
right.
Oh
Right.
my
There-
gosh.
If he started getting allergy shots, Kimmer would give him allergy shots, and that would calm him down. But as soon as that was starting to wear off, I think it was like, 3 weeks later, 4 weeks later or something, you could see his temper building up again over smells.
Wow. That's
Yeah.
wild. Okay, so but basically he lived and ate the same food you were eating. It was just prepared by his own cook, or they may have prepared even a different food or better prepared food for him. He wasn't there wasn't a dinghy or a what do you call it when you do the transfer from the boat to a boat that then takes you to the shore?
The tender.
No.
It wasn't
Well,
a
we had-
tender bringing him
Tender.
lunch or
No.
Oh, no, not at all. He had, the cook was set up with a cabin and it was turned into a kitchen. And at first he started eating with his aides, but he would like to finish cycles or finish things before he'd go eat. So the aides would be sitting there waiting and waiting and waiting. So it got to a point they were waiting too long and losing production time. So they set up his own dining room, and it had been an officer's lounge, and it was turned into his dining room and a family lounge for him at the bottom of the prom deck stairs down at A deck. So he started eating there with Mary Sue. And of course, they then got a purchaser who would go ashore and purchase different food for the cook, who would work out a menu. And then from there, the cook would make it. And there were times where you'd go to take a bath. There weren't a lot of baths, but there was 2 baths on B deck. And that's where the galley was for the Commodore. And you walk in and there's a lobster in the bathtub. A live lobster that's
going to be dinner later.
It's going to be dinner later. And that's how I learned about lobsters, because it's like they're alive in the bathtub.
Wow.
And that happened a few times, but most of the time, they got fresh food from ashore, and we weren't allowed to eat fresh vegetables. Everything had to be cooked because we were in Morocco at the time, and
you don't know
people-
what sort of diseases or what
You
sort of
didn't.
different things they have there, so you have to cook it to just
Right,
for safety
right.
reasons.
Exactly. So yeah, he had a cook, and he had a purchaser, and he had a steward and an assistant steward. One would serve the meals, one would clean the cabin and dust the auditing room and that type of thing.
But in terms of the food he was eating burgers and pasta and, the same kind of stuff you guys
Yeah.
were eating, and steaks, or, what it wasn't.
Meal, or that's done in half an avocado, and he'd put like olive oil on it and lemon and salt, and that's what he would eat as an appetizer before they brought in his main meal. And Mary Sue was, she would, for breakfast, she'd have some yogurt and some granola, and he would have some eggs and clipper, which is a fish, and it changed over time. And they would make him like fresh squeezed orange juice with an egg in it, but to drink until he got his breakfast.
Okay.
But
like a raw egg just mixed in with orange
like
juice?
a raw egg mixed in with the orange juice.
Rocky style.
Yeah, I was just going to say.
Right. Right.
I mean, in the 70s, that was probably a thing. This is how you can get some protein without having to cook it up. You just eat it.
Right. And even later, when he came back from New York, he would have Progest. As soon as he woke up, we'd have to pour this Progest into a glass and then add hot water and mix it up and take it down to him.
What's Progest?
It's a extra protein.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
That just came in a bottle and was this gooey stuff.
And Janis, didn't somebody tell us that when he was in New York? Janis, didn't somebody tell us when he was in New York? Jim Denkowski and then they cooked food for Ellerich. They just cooked it out of a can or whatever. I mean, he would eat whatever they would make for him, right?
Yes, which reminds me of something else he used to eat, and that is, but yeah, when he was in New York with Paul Preston and Jim Denkowski in 1973, they just threw on whatever, and the three of them would sit down and eat. And he wasn't into the smells or anything like that. One time he did comment to Jim Din that his pants needed to be washed, otherwise they'll be standing up on their own.
And just so you know, Mark and Claire, that time period is that photograph of L. Ron Hubbard with his hair really long and greasy.
Yeah.
Sitting at a desk. That photo was taken by Jim Denkowski, and that's when he was in New York City.
And there's stuff all over the bed.
Oh,
and his hair is messy, and he's
yes,
exactly. I almost used that picture for the thumbnail, but both him and Dave were doing a hand thing, and I thought, you know what, I'll use the one where they kind of look like they're doing the same little gesture there.
Right.
Wow.
And,
so then,
Janis, I have a question.
Yeah.
So obviously we're going to get to David Miscavige later, but was Hubbard physically abusive of staff that you witnessed?
No, there were some instances.
Sorry.
I remember, I think, 3 instances. One was for a guy who had slept with Hubbard's daughter.
Oh.
And he ended up getting a fist coming at him, as to why her.
Yep.
And another one was Otto Roos. And I told this story before on Otto basically trying to say that he'd gone through LRH's folders and LRH was a rock slammer. And I was running messages back and forth, and then Otto followed me up there to try and talk to him directly, and Hubbard took a swing at him, but Otto dodged it. And then another time was with Norman Starkey. My sister was there for that one, where Norman apparently nearly took us onto the rocks, and Hubbard was furious and took a swing at Norman.
Okay.
Wow.
So otherwise, he was not physically abusive with his fists and, hitting people and trying to run them down with cars and things like that. No, that did
Just
not
verbally.
happen.
But verbally, he'd rip into people.
And ordering cruel and unusual punishment, I'm guessing?
Exactly. Yeah. That's what I was about to say. The chain locker. And, growing up, seeing people go to the chain locker, I justified it in my head because I would hear the stories how in the Navy, sailors would come back drunk and they're thrown in the brig until they sober up, which is the equivalent of a chain locker. And so you're talking that corporal punishment from the 40s and 50s and here we are in the 60s with it still going on.
And then the overboarding too.
Right.
And the overboarding. Commit your sins and errors to the deep and hope you arise a better Thetan. And that was for people who had messed up on things, and also for auditors who had not gotten a well done session. They'd not done well with their PC. They were ordered overboard.
Right.
How many times do you think you saw somebody thrown over, or how many times do you think somebody was thrown overboard when you were on the ship? Like,
I went over once.
no, but I mean, like, was it 20 times or 100 times or 1,000 times?
Every day there were, during this time period in Corfu, every day the muster was on the well deck, and they'd stand there, the MAA, and read out who was going overboard.
So it was a list of people.
Oh yeah.
And
Yeah,
they
and
would
it
just-
wasn't-
gosh.
And it
they-
wasn't just Hubbard who ordered them. It became a regular thing of, he pissed me off, so he's going overboard.
yeah.
You know?
And Janis, weren't this the Class 8 course going on then too? These were Class 8 students, right? Auditor trainees.
That's where it seemed to start with, was the Class 8s, and they had to audit PCs, and my mother was even thrown overboard because she didn't get, a good session on her PC that one day. So the next day she was overboard. And even during the Hubbard's Class 8 lectures, Bob James and Joanne Robertson, I think it was, started play fighting on the stairs right where the lectures were going on. And I ran over and I said, stop. And they finally stopped. Well, when Hubbard came out, he was like, what was that noise? Because it was going to mess up his lecture. And I said, well, it was Bob and Joanne. He said, you order them overboard. So I ordered them overboard, and the next day they were called up and thrown overboard.
Wow. So it was a lot. It was a lot.
Oh yeah, it was.
And also, you're in a
used to-
harbor, right? So it's nasty.
Yes.
It's not the clean. It's
So-
not the cleanest water you're ever going to roll into.
No, depending on the tide.
Yeah.
But the locals got to the point where some would come out in their little rowboats and line up to watch the people going overboard.
Oh, so they knew. They're like, oh, they're about to have.
Oh, this is
We gotta get
entertaining,
over there.
yeah.
We're gonna miss the
Oh,
show.
8:00.
Oh my
God.
god! Hey guys,
Oh, wow.
get up! I know we got to go fishing, but we got to see these. There's a whole bunch of white people going to get thrown in the water off this boat over here.
Oh yeah.
Wow.
And I remember, like, Leon Steinberg couldn't swim, so instead of him going off the aft well deck, which was higher up, they put a life vest on him and threw him out the cattle doors, which was maybe 4 feet above the water. But even that, when you land in the water, that life vest is buoyant and it's going to pull his head up like this. And I remember watching it going, oh my God. And he just started flapping. He couldn't swim.
Oh my
And-
goodness! That's to me,
Amos-
that's the crazy thing, because they did that at the base too. There were people that couldn't swim, and when
Right.
they would have to go in at the international headquarters, we weren't out at sea, but we did have what was called a lake. It was sort of like an oversized muddy pond, but
Like a cattle pond.
yeah, but
Yeah.
people would get thrown into that, but it was only 3 feet deep. So if you
Right.
got thrown in, you would just stand up and you'd be okay.
Yeah.
Oh my
Well, I remember Amos Jessup telling me he was the captain of the Avon River, which was docked right behind us. And there was someone who went over who couldn't swim, and Amos ended up fishing him out of the water.
But they were still around. They were still good. They just
Yeah, they were still good, but
though.
yeah, they were just keeping their head up. They didn't know
Yeah.
how to swim and
Oh
get to
my
the ladder
goodness.
to climb up it.
Yeah, so
then-
that to me is one of the things that I always thought was really crazy about the base, that they did this thing overboarding. But then it was like, no, when they did that, they used to do this in the Sea Org when it was at sea, and they did it a lot more and a lot more frequently. But I never spoke to anybody who knew, like, who was there enough to go like, oh yeah, this happened all the time. But you're saying it was, so it would happen at that muster in the morning, but could it happen at any other point in the day, or was that the designated time?
No, it was always designated for that time in the morning.
Okay.
So-
that
and
is
it's-
different.
And it would come out in the orders of the day. Sometimes it'll be in the orders of the day saying so-and-so is to be thrown overboard. And if
Wow.
you
And
look at
so-
old orders,
Yeah. Sorry. So it was done
Yeah.
at muster in front of everybody.
yes.
So it's
Unbelievable.
humiliating.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
No, but Mark, I was
exactly.
going to
It was
say,
a double. It
during
was a
the-
double. Get
Yeah.
well, I was
you.
going to say, Mark, during the entire time I was at the Int base in Gillham, there was no overboarding. That didn't start till after we left. So that must have started after you got there,
No.
because I don't ever remember anybody being overboarded.
I remember Rick Asnaran ordering somebody, because I remember coming into MCI to go to dinner, and Rick had made them stand in front of the doorway soaking wet.
I've never heard this story.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
when I was first there in 1990, there was definitely overboarding. Well, actually, after the flood, overboarding. Then there you go. That's probably
we were
what makes
gone.
sense.
That's when we
After the
left.
flood, overboarding became a regular practice
Yeah.
at the property,
Right.
and that was in August of 1990. So it was right before you guys left, is when it became sort of.
Well, and that's when
in.
James Byrne, who had been on the ship, and Greg Wilhare were in there on mission, right. After the flood,
Yeah.
to get make the Gold Base a Sea Org unit again.
Yes.
And we're marching drills, and remember all that drills,
Yeah.
drills, and that's probably where that came from. And James would have gotten it from being on the Apollo.
Yeah.
Right. But now the insanity of the overboards, word gets out to the bases, like in Denmark, in England, and Los Angeles.
Other
So
sea
the
organization bases.
Other sea organization, yes. And so, like in Los Angeles, instead of overboarding, they would take a big hose and hose people down.
Yeah.
But you take I think it was in Denmark when Doreen Casey was there. She started flushing people's heads in the toilet.
Oh, it's called.
my
I think the proper nomenclature is a swirly. That's what that's called.
A swirly. Oh,
That's
okay.
when you get a swirly.
Well, she's the one
heck?
who started that. So this wasn't Hubbard who started the flushing heads, but the overboards kind of people go, oh, all right, we should take that punishment, but they can't do an overboard, so they come up with some other stupid idea.
Yeah.
Right.
They have to have an
Janis.
equivalent of that in their locale. So we'll talk about that a little bit later, because that also is something that happened with Dave as well. But yeah, Mark, what did you get?
Mark, yeah, Gary Jackson Moorhead's in the chat saying that was him, Janice, that Rick Aston
I
ran.
thought it was him. I thought it was him.
Rick put a sign around his neck. Anyway.
Wow.
I thought it was Jackson, but I was like, I better not say that, because I'm not 100. But that's the picture I kept getting, was Jackson standing there soaking
that
wet.
was me, Janice. Now, when was that, Janice?
That would have been 1990, early
No.
1990. No.
No.
Oh, no, Rick
Asner
Asner ran. So that would have been.
So it would have been like 1981.
Yeah.
So what are the chances that there's four of us
Jackson
talking
can
about
tell us.
something, and the
He does,
person that you were
1982.
talking about is in the chat of the video that we're talking about?
Yeah.
Small
It's a
world.
small world.
Okay, so
Yeah.
now back to L. Ron Hubbard, because we still have to cover Dave. So
Yes.
okay, so that was on the ship. So then when everything moved to land, and Hubbard went, he was in where? So after New York, he came back. So then what happened after you guys?
He came back to the ship.
Yep.
And then when we moved from the ship, and there were times we moved ashore for a month or two, and he just stayed in a regular little house or something.
But it was a rented house. They didn't buy a house.
Well,
and
he did own a house in Tangier.
Okay.
And it was renovated to build him an auditing room.
Okay.
Because there wasn't a room for that, to also have a room for the messengers and the steward and Mary Sue and her communicator. So a room was built on the patio for him to have a soundproof auditing room.
Okay.
And that was done before the ship sailed.
Okay.
But when we moved ashore in America, a condo was rented for him in Daytona, about 2 buildings down from the Neptune Inn, where all the staff were living in motel rooms. And that was done until we closed escrow on the Fort Harrison.
In
Clearwater, Florida. And that was 10 stories high. And there was a penthouse at the top. And Hubbard's plan was to live in the penthouse. And the crew would live in the main building, and the public would be in the cabanas. That was the plan.
Okay.
And he would have an office in the Clearwater building, the old bank building.
Yep.
However, just before we were moving, the guardian's office said, don't move into the penthouse until we have a safe base in Clearwater and everything's good. So that's when instead King Arthur's Court, one of the buildings over there, was rented so that
Dunedin.
Hubbard in Dunedin. So Hubbard and the messengers that were over 16 and a household unit and an external comm and, would all move there. And we did. So Hubbard had an apartment, a 2-bedroom apartment, him in one room, Mary Sue in the other.
Huh.
And these were just regular apartments like you would see today, just an apartment. There was nothing special about them. I've seen photographs of them. I went, wow, I can't believe that they lived there.
Yeah.
Wow.
And then
it was separate than the flag, let's say the flag base, because they were in a different location.
It was a 15-minute drive.
Okay.
15-minute drive from Dunedin to the Fort Harrison.
Wow.
And then in that same apartment building, it was like 2-story. The bottom story on one side was all garage. There was 2 on the other side. But his office, he had an apartment with his office in it, and external comm was also in the other room.
Okay.
So
if he wanted to get a message to somebody, it was one room away. They would get the message. And then they would
exactly. And yes.
Okay.
And people would come in and out, they'd be doing the driver for the van going back and forth would come in to pick things up. And, Hubbard's office was right there. It didn't matter. Anyway, so then when he had to take off and we went to Washington, D.C., in Washington, D.C., he had with him Michael Douglas, who handled his communications, Kimmer Douglas, who was like cooked for him, did his laundry and that type of thing. And then they had Jim Dinkowski come, and then Gail Riesdorf. And Gail would just dust and, so forth. And his lifestyle was that when he would wake up while everyone else was sleeping, he'd want something to eat before he went in session, and Kimmer would have a snack in the fridge ready for him. He'd just go to the fridge and feed himself and then go have his session and go back to bed. And even on the ship, messengers, we would open a can of corned beef for him.
Oh, yeah.
And he would eat corned beef and some cheese and crackers that we cut up for him. And that was it.
Okay. So
there was nothing elaborate.
Okay, good. Okay. And then where was the last place that you knew where he was? I mean, well, you were at the base. He was at Creston when you were at the Gold Base, right?
No. Well, when he moved from Washington, D.C. to LA area, he lived in an apartment there while the La Quinta Properties WHQ winter headquarters were purchased.
And that was
in
Los Angeles. He lived in an apartment.
He lived it's just outside of in the greater Los Angeles. Yes.
Oh, because I was told he lived in
Culver City
in Hemet.
No, well, he did.
That was later.
Okay.
Yeah. So we're now in La Quinta,
and
we've got several properties, and he has his own house called Rifle.
Yes. Okay. I've heard of Rifle.
That Rifle, he had an office. The messengers had an office. He had a dining room, living room. Mary Sue had an office. Mary Sue's communicator had an office. There was a kitchen. And then there was a guest house, which had a kitchen and 2 bedrooms. Mary Sue in one and him in the other. And it had a swimming pool.
Wow. And they always had separate bedrooms, it sounds like.
Yeah.
That's
they were always on different schedules.
They always had separate bedrooms.
Yeah. Well, they were always on different schedules. He might stay up till 6 a.m, case supervising or doing management stuff, and Mary Sue would go to bed at 3 o'clock.
Yeah.
And she'd be up before him. So they had different bedrooms.
Okay. Wow.
Anyway, so that was Rifle. Then when he had to skedaddle out of Rifle, he stayed at a hotel and then when we all moved to Hemet, to San Jacinto or Gillham Hot Springs, some apartments were rented in Hemet. He did not move into the base. though he was going to live up at Bonneview, which was like a 2,000 square foot home with 3 bedrooms, I think, but it
Yeah.
was small.
Yeah.
But he
It
lived
was a
in
single
Hemet.
level house.
Yes.
Bonneview.
Yes.
Story.
What we
Yes.
often refer to as BV on the channel, or
Right.
Bonneview. That was the
Right.
L. Ron Hubbard house at the top of the hill on the property at the international headquarters.
Right.
It was there when you were there.
Right. It was originally called the New Gillman House because there was an old Gillman house
Yeah.
on the property that was further, down and away. Anyway, so instead of him coming to the base, because Bonneview was not really messed up or anything. It was just,
It's just an average.
but for security purposes until things settled down, because they were reporters were hunting for him and so forth. He moved into an apartment that we called X in Hemet.
Wow.
And there he had a 1-bedroom apartment that he lived in. Mary Sue was in LA at this time because she was fighting her legal.
Yeah, she was about to go to jail for the largest infiltration in the United States government in its history.
Right. So she was not part of the scene at this point, though they wrote letters every day.
Okay.
But he lived in a single bedroom apartment. But Kimma would pretty much go in there and cook him meals. But sometimes she'd cook them in her apartment and take them into him. And he had just a round coffee table that he did all his work at. Not a coffee table, a round little breakfast nook table.
Mhm.
And the messengers would sit around there with him and go through things with him, or he'd sit there and talk to us. But that's where he did his work. He had a couch and a TV with a VCR and the little kitchen.
Okay.
And that was it. And even if Kimma was on Liberty and Sanaa wasn't there, I remember we went to the grocery store and we got some steaks and came back and he taught me how to cook steaks.
Wow.
And we just sat down and had steaks together, but there was none of this elaborate stuff.
Yeah.
But he did have a lot of messengers.
Yeah.
Right.
At first it started with 1 per watch, and then it was 2, and then on the ship it was 3, and then there was trainees or ghost messengers learning. So those were always around, and they were always trying to figure out what to do. So someone has the bright idea, let me hold the ashtray for him so it looks like I'm busy.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm not the odd man out here. Just
exactly.
But the thing that was that strikes me though, and everything that you've said so far, is that it didn't seem like you guys were afraid of him.
No. But there were times, I'd tell you, I didn't like his yelling.
Yeah.
And there were times where before I'd go on watch, I'm like, okay, I can do this. I'm going to make sure that everything is smooth. He's not going to yell at me. I'm not going to mess up. And I'd have to try and get myself in a mental state to go out now, take on that challenge.
Yeah.
And there were days where, he'd get mad at you, but at the end of your watch, he'd say, thank you, honey, you did a good job, or we'd get acknowledged for what we had done. It wasn't a constantly ragging on us. If he got mad about something, he yelled about it and then he calmed down.
Okay.
And there were, I don't remember any brutal punishments or anything. I was never locked up in a hole.
Yeah.
I was locked up for 11 days for wanting to leave.
Yeah.
When they were trying to assign me to the RPF as a list 1 RS. Yeah, and that was in La Quinta. And I know he knew about it because I got a letter from Mary Sue, and the only way she would have found out is through him writing to her.
Yeah.
Right.
Wow.
How old were you when that happened, Janis?
I just turned 22.
Wow.
Because on my birthday, I remember I was already 21. I just turned 22, and I was sitting in his room talking to him about my birthday. And I was like, oh, I'm getting so old. I'm going to be 22. And he's like, that's still young. I'm like, no, it's, And he said, well, what age would you like to be? And I said, well, I like 21. He says, okay, well, today's your first anniversary.
Wow. Yikes.
Janis,
Okay.
I have a question. How did LRH or Hubbard line up with David Miscavige in terms of paranoia? And by that specifically, I mean, David Miscavige was is one of the most paranoid people I've ever met. Was Hubbard like that? Like, were there actually reporters he was hiding from, or was a lot of that paranoia?
No. We lived through a whole period. I was on the ship for 8 years. We sailed around. We got kicked out of countries. He kept trying to get involved with the local government, and that would get us kicked out. But every country we went to and every port we went to, he would insist we do open house, have the people come, show them a good time, have parties for the VIPs. And he'd just sit in his office working away, and all these people are streaming by, looking in the window at this man working away, with no clue who he is,
Yeah.
And he didn't try and hide from that or anything. And then when we moved ashore and the reporter shows up at King Arthur's Court in Dunedin, that's when he was like, and took off. He took off to DC. But then when he was in DC, Kimmel put fake hair in his hat and put glasses on him and stuff like that to try and make him look different. And he would go and sit in a park, which worried Kimmel, and he'd sit there photographing Secret Service people with these little spy camera. And she was always worried he was going to get challenged if they caught what he was doing. But there was not that. He was around the staff and the crew.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
And he didn't try and hide from them. He would talk to them. He'd shoot movies with them. Even when he was at X, he had a van, and we'd get in the van and we'd drive over to the Gold Base, and he would film with the crew, and then he'd go over into Bonnie View and he'd sit there and have dinner or a snack, and then go back to shooting or whatever. But he was afraid of IRS and reporters, so.
Well,
But,
David Miscavige was afraid of the Sea Org members.
Yeah, exactly.
Janice, I think you'll agree with me. I also want to point out he didn't have bodyguards. Okay, he did
No.
not have. There was no security force. The security were the messengers that were with him. When he went off to Sparks or Reno, he took Pat and Annie Broker when he went to Cruston, but he took Pat and Dee Dee,
Claire and Dee Dee in Sparks.
Yeah, so he just took his messengers. He didn't have an armed bodyguard or anything like that.
Wow.
Yeah, and he would walk around the streets and so forth. I mean, we used to go in the grocery stores. I showed up one day for watch wearing flip-flops, which I got a lecture about, and then he took me to a shoe store and brought me a pair of shoes.
Yeah.
But yeah, he was not afraid to go and talk to the Sea Org members.
Okay. So then that really brings us to when he was at what's the next thing? Then he was at Creston after that. That's when he
took off.
After X. Yeah, after X, he took off with Pat and Annie and went around in an RV for a while. And then they finally got Creston, but that house wasn't renovated properly, so he lived in the Bluebird,
which is
and he had just Pat and Annie and Sarge with him.
And they were the ones that lived in the house, and they stored stuff in the barn, the horse barn, and so. But he was living in that Bluebird motorhouse,
in the Bluebird
next to the house.
Right. And he would get out and he would walk and he'd meet neighbors and talk to the neighbors. They didn't know who he was. He'd grown his hair again and had a different name.
Somebody told me when he dressed up, because he wore like a bolo and he had these like big white suits. And I think it was Gary Weesey told me that one time they were walking and someone said, "Is that Colonel Sanders?" He looked like Colonel Sanders grew his hair out. That's what he looked like. Because it was all white, and and he dressed in a white suit like Colonel Sanders with like a black bolo. It's like, is that Colonel Sanders? Wow. Okay. So then that sounds appropriate to what we've heard in terms of stories and people who were there and that sort of thing. Okay. Well, I mean, in terms of David Miscavige, comparing them, why don't you tell me, Mark, from the beginning, because you were roommates with him in Clearwater
Right.
when you first got into the Sea organization there. And you guys just lived like Sea Org members. You just were living in an
Yeah, we
apartment.
lived on the 9th floor of the Fort Harrison in a dormitory in one of the hotel rooms. There's about 6 of us in the room, and he had just joined the Sea organization and in the Commoner's Messenger org, and he was just like everybody else. And then from there, I checked out at that point. But then Janis was the one who actually you were the commanding officer in Clearwater for the Commoner's Messenger org, right, Janis? And you're the one who sent him to La Quinta, right?
Yes. Yeah, I'd gotten a telex from Hubbard saying I need some more messengers.
Good job, Janis. Good job. You could have picked anybody else. You could have picked it. You could have picked a million different people, but you picked this guy.
I know.
He
But at
actually
least I'm not
failed on his first mission. He was
Yes.
he was a missionary, and he failed.
I think that was his only mission that he
Yeah.
did. It was a mission into the Flag Service org, and they failed on it. And then he was doing investigations or programs execution for me. And then I got a message saying that he needed some messengers. So I took Dave, sent him. I took Shelley and sent her because she just hit 16 years old and didn't need to
Go to
high school.
go to school anymore.
Right.
Yeah.
That's
So
the thing too, guys, just so you know, if anybody's watching, if you're in the Sea Org and you're like 12 or 13, you're supposed to go to school. And so there's sort of like this veiled attempt to sort of satisfy that by having them study, these kids study or go to actually attend a school if there's a school nearby. But then when you get to 16 in the United States, if you're 16 or older, you don't legally have to attend school. You can drop out of school. And so if you're in the Sea organization and you hit 16, it's guaranteed that you will never, ever go to school ever again after that point. And they're just, because now they're off the hook legally. And L. Ron Hubbard's like, you don't need that education. You need a Scientology education. So it's sort of agreed upon by the group that you don't need to go to school. So when Shelley was 16, she was able to go because she didn't legally have to attend school anymore.
correct.
Wow. Okay. And then, so when Dave moved from Florida to California, that is essentially when he started his ascent as a messenger. And what?
Yeah, no, not really.
Okay.
I sent him in January, and then I ended up being called up there in April.
Of what
When
year?
I got there in 1977.
Yeah.
When I got there in April, he was the traffic messenger. There was no LRH communicators, so all traffic had to be filtered before it went to Hubbard. So Dave was given that job. He was not a messenger on watch, helping Hubbard do things and running messages and that type of thing. He just dealt with the traffic.
But he was he was part of the
dispatches and
CMO. He was
messages.
part of the Commodore's messenger. org.
Yes, he was part of the Commodore's messenger org. And I remember when I showed up, there was a messenger garden that had been created on the outside of the wall of Rifle. And there was Dave, showing me his radishes that he'd grown and this type of thing. It was just, a young kid learning things.
Yeah.
And then, so then in July 77, I think it was, when the FBI raided.
Yeah.
Dave was not working with Hubbard as a messenger. He was still just filtering the traffic.
Okay. The communications that are coming in.
Yes.
Hubbard, that's what
It's
when in
called traffic.
Scientology, that's called traffic. It just means
Right.
dispatches and communications.
Not to be confused with cars, of course.
No.
Right. So Hubbard took off with Dee Dee and Gail and Pat and went to Sparks. That left the
Nevada.
rest of us. Yeah, that left the rest of us just doing
Limbo.
investigations. No, we continued things he would have done, and running things in Clearwater and CMO in Los Angeles and so forth. We still continued that, and we had programs that we worked on executing and working to continue fixing the property up. And then we also manned a telephone So 24 hours, we manned this one telephone in case we got a call. And otherwise, we would go out and go find a payphone and relay messages to Pat, or go to Los Angeles and meet Pat with a bag full of money and hand it over to him so that they had some money, because Hubbard wanted to just operate on cash. So we did things, you know.
Yeah.
We kept busy, but we also got to, for our first time, have liberty together. We could never have done that before, you know. And we'd go do great things. We'd go tubing down the Salt River or something like that. Anyway, and meanwhile, Hubbard's now in Sparks, just living in a 2-bedroom apartment with Gail, Dee Dee, and Pat living in one room and Hubbard in the other room. And,
Wow.
you know, Dee Dee just cooking the food or Claire washing the clothes. No one was dusting every day, and there was no complaints.
Yeah. Wow.
And no bodyguards and no special food flowing in or anything.
So when do you think, so Dave, I want to say in the mid 80s is when does Dave, because I know he was in CMON, was he the action chief?
Action chief.
He was
Yeah.
an action chief.
Well, he actually started running projects and missions while Hubbard was gone.
Yeah.
And then he's coming back. He was going to come back in January 78. So he wanted each messenger to train on a different area of cine.
Okay.
So I got makeup. Dave got video camera with Mark Yeager. Terry got camera, you know, so we're all assigned to different things. And when Hubbard came back, Dave was the video cameraman.
Yes. He was video IC.
Video IC.
Yes.
And so he was on the set doing the videos and replaying those so Hubbard could look at what went on the film.
Yeah.
And then my sister and Jerry got in trouble and was sent to the RPF, so they needed a new cameraman. So Dave was put on cameraman at that point.
Because he'd been on a video camera before that.
Right.
So it was sort of the natural progression is, okay, now you're going to work a film camera.
Right. Now, when Hubbard got sick at the end of 78, he was no longer filming, so it was back to regular messenger duties for everybody. So Dave at that point was still a messenger in training. He was never a senior messenger, never in charge of a watch or handling things directly for LRH. He was like the third person called.
Yeah. That's what we were told at the base for whenever somebody would ask, oh, did he used to be this? Is like, no, there's like very few references that talk about Dave, like Scientology policies,
right?
Or what they called at the base. Anything that L. Ron Hubbard wrote to the base in that 80s period or the late 70s were called advices because he supposedly wasn't running Scientology. So anything that he wrote was just advice to us, which we followed as if it was an order from L. Ron Hubbard directly.
Right.
But the only thing that we could find when we looked up Miscavige was he assigned David Miscavige and Mark Yeager like a condition of confusion or liability for messing up a shot or something like that.
On the videos,
on the shoot crew, you know.
But Hubbard used to call Dave the kid.
Yes.
We had two Davids, David Rousseau and David Miscavige. And so it was DR and DM, or Hubbard would always just say, where's the kid?
Yeah. Wow.
And nobody else was a kid. Just Dave was the kid.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So then after he's action chief, then he was,
he wasn't yet action chief.
Oh, okay.
Because then we moved to Hemet.
Okay.
And LRH is out at X. And Dave is running missions at this point.
Okay.
He is.
Yeah.
But messengers would go out for a week to X, and we'd stay there for a week and then go back to the base and do whatever our jobs were before. Well,
which was like about 4 miles away.
Yeah.
Right.
But they didn't want the heavy changeover of the traffic every day because the other people living in the apartments would notice something wrong. But as if these people wouldn't notice, this redheaded man who's always yelling and screaming about something. And I'd be, oh my God, does he have to yell? These people are going to hear, you know?
Wow.
But anyway, we used to go out for a week at a time. And Dave was like too busy running missions. And then they were setting up watchdog committees. So he got himself on as the watchdog committee for Sea Org, for the Sea Org orgs. So he couldn't go out to X anymore. And this was just an excuse not to go out there.
Yeah.
Because he was too busy doing other things. He obviously had a problem having to work directly with Hubbard.
Yeah.
You know. So then Hubbard took off. Well, the messengers running management ended up in Los Angeles.
Right.
And then Hubbard took off, and Dave was the action chief at that point. But it was his attitude where you try and point something out to him, he'd try and back you off, and he's always trying to show how right he was about things.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And yeah.
Makes sense. That checks out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That remained true to today.
And then as the mission ops and action chief, he was assigned the job to fire missions to sort out the corporations.
Yes.
Right.
Because everything was under the Church of Scientology of California. So that all had to be sorted out to start a Church of Scientology International and break things up into different corporations so that everything wasn't in one basket to be sued.
Yeah.
Right.
And so everything was moved out of the Church of Scientology of California, making that a shell corporation, and set up all the other corporations. And that was Dave's job as a mission ops.
Okay. This all makes sense now, because that's really the thing that might have started the wheels turning.
Well, yeah.
Right.
Plus also, Janice, don't forget, he also had to dismantle the Guardian's office at that same time.
But
as part of
that's later. That's later, because now he's got this power of doing the corporation sort out, but that's okay. He wasn't interfering with anybody else. But LRH asked for a report. LRH came back on the lines. And at this time, Dee Dee was the commanding officer and in charge, and she used to have to go and meet with Pat at nighttime. So she was like, Dave, will you come with me? So she wasn't the only female showing up in a bar to meet Pat, and sitting there waiting for hours. So he was going along as an escort for Dee Dee. And he'd already been buddy with Pat.
Yeah.
They'd been roomies back at La Quinta. So Dee Dee then got tired of just sitting around listening to Pat, having a lack of people to talk to. Pat would just ramble on for hours, and Dee Dee's worried about international stats and her desk piling up. So she's like, Dave, why don't you just take the stuff to Pat? Because they got along so well and would talk for hours.
Yeah.
So then what happened?
He became the go-between.
He became the go-between.
That's where the big mistake was made.
Right, because then what happens is Dee Dee does an interview, and she's talking to Omar
Garrison.
Who was working on LRH's biography, and she's just telling him everything. But she says that's why she was busted. And I say, no, I remember she got busted because when LRH went off the lines, we had the buy now, where every end of the month, the prices were going up 5%.
Scientology prices.
Scientology prices, because they hadn't been kept up with the economy for so long. We needed to do a catch up. So every end of the month, they were to go up 5%. The Regs loved it at the end of the month because they do a buy now, and the public were like having quickly before the prices go up. So Mary Sue had commented to Dee Dee, because we were all kind of, what do we do? Should we cancel this? It's getting too high, and the public are getting upset about it. And Mary Sue said to Dee Dee, why don't you put a stop to it? And Dee Dee did. So Dee Dee ends up getting busted right around that same time. And I thought it was for doing that. Dee Dee thought it was for blabbing to Omar. But anyway, Dave comes back having gone and met with Pat, with Gail, who was Dee Dee's deputy, for internal.
Yeah.
And they come back with this order posting Gail as the commanding officer of the CMO and removing Dee Dee. And Dave is assigned special project ops only to report to Pat and LRH. So he had, through his connection with Pat, he had managed to separate himself out from the CMO.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so
what,
now
what
he
year
just
was
reported.
this?
This would have been
81.
81, I think.
81. Yeah.
So 81 to 86 was the period that he was strategically negotiating.
Well,
himself
Janis
into.
is right.
Yes.
He was special project ops. That's what everybody knew him as then.
Yeah.
And then he became the chairman of the board of author services
Yeah.
during that time period as part of the whole
Right.
corporate sort out.
But
And
he
then
was the one
eventually,
doing the corporate sort out. So
right. And he was the one
Exactly.
overseeing it all.
he knew exactly which organization he wanted to be the head of at that time, because that would
Right.
give him the autonomy, but also he still had that connection to L. Ron Hubbard. And he was also COB ASI, which was the one organization that was never
made
going to
money.
be a nonprofit. It was always
Right.
going to be a for-profit, and it was always going to be swimming in cash.
Right. And yet,
Right.
and Mark, what Jana said, when he came back with that autonomy that he only reported to Pat or LRH, he then
Yeah.
started flaunting it. You know what I mean? Like he could
Well-
remove the CMO if he wanted to, and he could put his buddies in different positions. He acted like the cock of the walk. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, what then actually happened was Gail is now the CO, and she's seeing that Dave getting a little too big headed,
Mm-hmm.
and she got a message to Pat. And to do that, you had to go to a payphone, call a beeper number, and then wait for Pat to call you back. So Gail goes to John Brasseau and has John take her to the payphone. And I remember I come along and I'm like, I'm looking for Gail, and I'm like, oh, she's gone. I'm like, oh, okay. And then I go in to see Dave, and I see a hole in the wall. I'm like, how'd that hole get in the wall? Oh, Dave was pissed off. I'm like, Dave did that? Yeah. And I'm like, why? Well, he was mad at Gail, and he's gone off trying to find Gail. So Gail had gotten to the payphone to get the message to Pat. Dave finds out she's trying to get a hold of Pat, and obviously he knows it's going to be about him.
And he knows
So
where the payphone is.
He
Yeah.
knows where the payphone is. So he then gathers a couple of guys, and they go pile into a van, and off they go. Well, then at the payphone, they're trying to pull Gail away and get her into a car. Meanwhile, Mark Yeager comes with a crowbar, and he's bashing the payphone so it won't work.
Breaking it.
What the
Well,
heck?
Gail thought it was Dave who was doing it, but John Brasseau says he thought it was Yeager doing it.
Yeah.
Anyway, it was this whole thing where they finally push Gail into a car and basically kidnap her from there and take her back to the base. Next thing you know, Gail's now busted, and John Nelson is being put on. And John Nelson was a mission ops under Dave as the action
David, yeah.
chief.
Mm.
They were so tight, those two.
Yeah.
So that's where Dave had control of that.
Wow.
Yep.
And it was this whole phone booth fiasco.
That's crazy. Okay, so then when Vicky Asnaran,
Asnaran.
she's COB or the head of RTC. What did they call that? What did they
The
call
Inspector
it?
General.
Yeah.
Inspector
It was actually
General.
Steve Marlowe.
Yeah.
We're jumping around. It was actually
Yeah,
Steve
it was
Marlowe.
Steve
and
Marlowe first.
Vicky was
Yeah.
his deputy. Yeah.
Yeah, but then when she left the C org and left RTC, then that's when Dave moved from ASI
ASI.
to then COB RTC.
Right. This
Yeah.
is after LRH died, and they had to get rid of Pat and Annie, and Vicky and Jesse were allied with Pat and Annie, so they basically all got kicked
Yeah.
out.
Well,
and,
what happened in there is Pat and DM were kind of working together, and Vicky and Annie worked together.
Yeah.
And Mark Yeager was the CO, and I was KK was the chief officer and I was the operations chief. So I was running all the operations. And there was RTC had come along and had insisted that no one was fully hatted anymore. Therefore, you can't get any more bonuses unless you've had the FPRD, the false purpose rundown. And if you've had the false purpose rundown, then you can be considered fully hatted. So that basically stripped everybody of being able to have bonuses and different perks. So a few months later, the income, the international income is going down and deliveries going down and so forth. And I go to Jaeger and I say, the date coincidence on this is when RTC implemented taking away people's fully hatted status and our bonuses. And then what happens is Vicky and Annie are teaming up and wanting to take out Jaeger. And DM and Pat come along and they're like trying to investigate what the hell's going on. And it comes up that Jaeger supported me on saying RTC were the cause of the crash in international stats for implementing the false purpose rundown on us all and taking away our bonuses. And Pat and DM are like, yeah, this is totally correct. And that's when they were like, Vicky was going after Jaeger. And that's when it was like, wait a minute, something's going on here. Why is she still doing this?
Yeah.
And so then they took out Vicky and Jesse and did a whole
and all
rework with that.
the whole
Right.
cabal that was
Right.
Yeah,
religious.
there's actually more involved than that. It's more involved.
Well,
than
yeah,
that.
no, I know, but we're not.
Yeah.
I wasn't trying to
Yeah.
make this a video about David Miscavige, how
No,
he
I
took it
know.
over. But I mean, it's kind of probably no one's ever really told it in any great amount of detail.
Right.
But regardless, the way it worked in religious technology is it's religious technology center is there was the inspector general, and then below the inspector general was ethics, tech, and admin. And
Right.
there was no COBRTC. That didn't exist.
No, I did the
No.
org board, Mark. I'm the
Yeah.
one who did the org board and the stats.
Yeah.
Miscavige I was working for him as the corporate liaison in charge, and he
Yeah.
took over RTC, and he had this idea. He had already pulled up Jaeger and Midoff and Marty to be there, and he wanted them to be his deputies, and he wanted Greg Wilhare to be the inspector general, and then he wanted to be the chairman of the board of RTC, which never existed.
Yeah.
So I did the whole ethics, tech, and admin org board, including all the divisions of the org. I had to do that, the statistics, the valuable final products, the whole bit. And so I'm the one who wrote all that up based on what he wanted done.
Yeah, but
I was redoing all that in 2004, Mark.
Well, there you go.
Small
but
world.
essentially he had already held this title in another organization
And
he
in author
knew-
services.
Yeah, and he knew that he was untouchable in that position. So he just created that position in a higher, more powerful organization within the Scientology structure. And this is the other thing that is kind of crazy, is that he had been picking his team at all points of this track of this timeline. Is he was putting his boys and his
Right.
club in the places where he needed them, so that when he was going to do something, he'd be like, hey, you got my back. And then those guys, and the wildest thing is today, those are all the people that are in the hole, are all his.
Right.
Right. And while he was putting those people in position, he was getting rid of anyone who had been connected to Hubbard.
Yes.
Right.
Because they knew Hubbard wouldn't do those things.
Exactly.
So they knew
He took
that he'd get kickback from them.
Right. Because I was even taken out at that time. And that's when the running program came about, because they were trying to offload and declare me. And then Hubbard was like, have her get out and run as a solution to handling my disaffection with everything going on.
Yeah, but the other thing I want to say is that he was also controlling, up until L. Ron Hubbard's death, he was controlling the information flow to Pat.
Yes.
Right.
And then,
Yes.
and therefore to L. Ron Hubbard. So he could
Right.
spike the deck any way he wanted. If there was a bad report that would out him, he could just remove that from the pack.
Correct.
Which
And that's
he
what he
did.
did with Gail, but when he came and blew up the phone. That was
Yeah.
that's
Right.
a
But
perfect example of that.
Yes, but he also, when LRH ordered him sec checked, he ordered Pat
Mayo.
and David Miscavige and Pat were both ordered to sec checks. Mayo did Pat's and Jesse Prince did Dave's.
David
And
Mayo.
the reports on those sec checks never got to Hubbard because they were put in the box to go up to Hubbard, and Dave and Pat removed them from the box.
Wow.
Right, and some of the crimes were taking some of the cash that they had for L. Ron Hubbard and gambling it away in Las Vegas and hooking up with prostitutes and all sorts of stuff. And of course, that stuff never made it to Hubbard.
Well, also the bad investment into the oil wells with Hubbard's money.
Yes.
That would have come up as well. Yeah. And Hubbard never knew that all that money was.
It was like $30 million.
$30 million on oil wells that was lost.
Wow.
Yeah, but Mark, you make a good point. He put his allies, quote unquote, in key positions of power. The other aspect of it, though, was because he was overseeing the corporate sort out and the different corporations, he had the attorneys all on his side too. He hired and fired the attorneys, and the attorneys would basically set up all the corporations and paperwork to protect him as well. Yeah. So he had it all worked out, you know. And then he basically towed the line, in my opinion, because we left in 1990, because until the IRS tax exemption, because that was priority number one after Hubbard died, because all the money that Hubbard left was supposed to go into, you know, it's supposed to go to Church Scientology, spiritual technology, but basically Scientology. But that couldn't happen until they got tax exemption. So he had to play ball all the way up to that point. And then after that, that's when he started, you know, going nuts and spending all this money and all that sort of stuff, you know.
Yeah, and the other thing was that he had spent years trying to get this all clear for Hubbard, and as part of and that's really what a lot of the corporate sort out was revolving around. But he had spent years with the lawyers and the corporate sort out people trying to figure out how L. Ron Hubbard could have inurement happening where he could profit from Scientology and it wouldn't blow back on Hubbard. So he was the perfect person to figure out how to do that for himself, because he had been working on it for Hubbard for years and years and years. Yeah. So once he got himself into the right position, he already knew most of the ways that this was going to work out to benefit him after Hubbard died. And I think this is a perfect kind of segue into, okay, let's talk about Dave and how he ran the joint and how he lived. When he was first in RTC, and you guys were there, at that time, the base, the international headquarters, was where he was living, right? When he became COB RTC.
Right, yeah, he moved up. He had been in Los Angeles, but he moved up and spent more time at the base.
Okay, good. And
I can cover his facilities because I was in charge of them. Basically, he always had a room, even when he was in Los Angeles, and also when he was special project ops, in the lower villa. That bedroom that was right next to what later became the officers' lounge was his and Shelley's bedroom, and that's what he had. And then you'll know the officers' lounge part I'm talking about, Mark. It wasn't the officers' lounge until Pat and Annie were kicked out. That was Pat and Annie's birthing, what later became the officers' lounge. Nice. So they had that big part. DM was right next door. So as soon as she took over in RTC, that room got nuked, and that became the officers' lounge, which was basically just a lounge for David Miscavige and whoever he wanted to come in there, because there were no other officers allowed in there unless he was allowed in there. Yeah. So he had his bedroom and he had that officers' lounge. We had an office in the middle villa, and my office was next door with a connecting door, and those were his facilities. He had a car that was provided for by RTC, or if whatever, it was an Acura. It was just a regular sedan. And then he had a Honda Passport motor scooter. It was light blue and white, and he and Shelley would be tooling around the property on that. And that's all he had when when I was there.
Yeah.
Now, right when I was getting busted, they were busting through a wall into another room next to their bedroom to make like a clothing room or whatever for him. But that was what he had. Now, he had high-end stereo, you know that, Mark. He had clothes. He collected cowboy boots. He got, he started getting tailor-made clothes and all that sort of stuff. But
well, now I'm going to tell you. Now I wanted to let Claire tell us, because Claire, when she was in Religious Technology Center, she was the internal executive. So she was over all the internal RTC divisions that serviced him and bought his personal stuff and fed him and all that stuff. And so, and also she was aware of these bonuses that were being paid out.
No, that started when he came over from ASI. I was involved in that.
Well, let's hear about that, Claire.
Yeah. So, well, so from 96 to 2004 is the years that I was in Religious Technology Center, and Barbara Griffin was over the finance area. By that point, though, just RTC had hit 30 million in reserves, like just that, small organization. And Barbara Griffin was researching how to get Dave's salary to be equivalent to other similar positions. And
like
they
religious leaders.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's right. Yeah. Nothing to do with SO Pay. He was on his own system, which was carefully hidden from everybody. But Barbara Griffin was the one who administered all of that behind the scenes. And then,
how much do you think he was being paid a year in terms of a salary? It was like 300,000 or something?
Yep, about that. And also separate to that, the bonuses were structured so that Dave was number 1, Larice was number 2, and Shelley was number 3. And that was specifically structured, even though Shelley was senior and higher than Larice, so that you wouldn't have Mr. and Mrs. getting paid the most.
Right.
It used to be the other way. It used to be the other way. It was Dave and Shelley at the top of the RTC bonus.
But before RTC, Shelley and Dave were at ASI, and they were getting high pay then because ASI was a non-profit, so they
they were
for profit.
They were full profit,
yeah.
So they had to be paid equivalent of, and then apparently they had to pay for their rent and stuff like that. But they got a much higher pay, no longer sealed pay. So Dave was used to that when he came up to RTC.
Right, because when he came to RTC and I did the org board, I did the bonus system too, because Dave had to be paid the same as he got paid at Author Services. He was not taking a pay cut. Okay.
Right.
So that's why all the RTC executives in those days, like me and several others, that's why we were getting bonuses like $1,500, $2,000. We get an end of the year bonus of $3,000 or $4,000. And that's why when people go, I know, like Mark, you were in gold and all that, you guys barely got paid anything, right? People go like, well, what about you? I had lots of money because, shoot, my wife and I saved up to $26,000 just off of Sea Org bonuses when I was in RTC. Why? Because Dave Miscavige and Shelley needed to be paid. Okay, and Barbara Griffin was responsible for making sure bonuses got paid.
That's so
Well,
wild.
so during the years, during the years that I was there, but during the years that they were doing the bonuses, it was just Dave and Shelley and his staff, not the RTC executives anymore.
That's exactly what I was going to say. It got to the point where even though Claire was in RTC and they were getting bonuses, it wasn't anything like the heyday of the main executives of RTC.
Well, and see, that's Miscavige putting on a show. He was putting on a show because he didn't look. He was still afraid when he came and became COB RTC that he didn't trust all the executives that were up at CMO Int and ED Int and this and that. So he was playing by the rules. Like he flew first class, but he didn't take private jets. That would have been considered a financial irregularity. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
And, like I used to have to go down to see Mark Ingber or Tom Ashworth, who were the WDC reserves, to get these huge expenses approved. And they'd look at me kind of funny. And I kind of felt the same way, but basically that was frowned upon in the Sea Org. We didn't spend money on huge cars and things like that. It just that was not what it was for.
Yeah, when we were in Golden Air Productions, I got my. It's funny that you mentioned that figure, 26,000, that you had saved up between you and Julie. When I
It was
was,
all me.
yeah, well, when I
I'm
was
sure.
in the Sea
Sorry,
Org,
but yeah.
I was in the Sea Org joined at Able, but at Gold from 1990 to 2005, my Social Security statement says that I earned a total of $26,000 for the entire 15 years that I was in the Sea
Wow.
organization. And
Yeah.
that averages, if you just take the sheer amount of hours we worked, not the all-nighters, not the craziness, just the hours, it's 36 cents an hour. That's how much I was paid for working in the Sea Org for 15 years. I was paid 36 cents an hour. So to hear that, David Miscavige is getting a $300,000 a year salary as a Sea Org member. And now this is the reason I wanted to talk about this stuff, is because this is what Scientologists are interested in. People that are wondering if they're in Scientology and if David Miscavige is a con man or a cult leader, or he's being treated differently than other Sea Org members. This is how it's working. This is what's happening behind the scenes that he's not telling anybody about. And in most cases, I would say 99% of Sea Org members don't know that he's making several $100,000 a year.
Right.
And at the same time, if somebody outside of Scientology or outside of the Sea Org goes, well, I mean, who cares? He is the leader of Scientology. $300,000 is not that much. But then you go, okay, that's fair. It's probably a hell of a lot more these days, because we've been gone for, a decade or more. But then also, he doesn't have any expenses. He doesn't pay for anything at all. And this is how I wanted to segue to the next thing, which is the things that David Miscavige had. We heard about the stuff that L. Ron Hubbard had. David Miscavige, when I was there for the 15 years I was there, I went and worked on many of his audiovisual systems all over the world. And at the international headquarters, he had multiple places where he had these very, very expensive setups that in any one setup could be just as like when I say setup, I mean like an audiovisual system. Like he had a lounge in the dining area. You might have heard us mention this place called MCI. That's Massacre Canyon Inn. And that is the dining hall that all of the Sea Org members at the Int base would go to eat at in the middle of the property each day. In that building, he had what was called, it wasn't the officer's lounge. What was it called? It was called the billiards room.
Yeah, billiards room.
It's called
That's
the
right.
billiards room. You're muted.
Oh, that was a crew lounge.
It used to be a crew lounge, but then it was
crew lounge, and it was a game room, whatever it was.
It had a giant pool table in the middle of it. It had a stereo system. It had satellite TV. It had a Nintendo 64 game system in it. It had all this stuff. But again, the only person that was really allowed to use that was David Miscavige. There was no one else that was allowed to just go in there and monkey with stuff. And even if he was going to watch he was from Philadelphia. And if he was going to watch a football game, we would have to go around to all these sort of setups that he had all over the base and make sure that the satellite, it was in the days where you had to, when you push the channel, the satellite would move and it would adjust itself to point at the satellite that game was going to be on. And so we'd have to go around the property and we'd have to make sure that all the satellites were tuned to the right station so he could watch his football games whenever that was going to be. But then that system could be a $50,000 to $100,000 system, just that one. Well, he had 4 or 5 of those on the property at the Int base, but then he also had one of those in UK. He had one of those in Los Angeles at ASI, at Author Services, where he stayed. He had one of those in Clearwater. He had one of those at Clearwater at the WB building where the CMO and RTC were located. But he also had one of those systems at the Hacienda Apartments where he had a full apartment. So, and then when he was going down to Los Angeles more and working with Tom Cruise and doing lots of stuff in Hollywood, there was an apartment building next to ASI, right directly adjacent to ASI, and it was called El Cadiz. He bought that entire apartment building, and so he could have his own private apartment and he could have offices there. And then they built a tunnel so that he could walk from ASI to El Cadiz. So he was getting all of that stuff, and none of that was coming out of his pocket. That was just things that were being provided for him. So what are some of the other things, Claire?
Yeah, so the private jets and all that being the primary mode of transportation started right after 9/11, because obviously September 11th was right before the IAS event, which is and always has been the cash cow of events, where they rake in millions of dollars. And so at that point, that's when the transport changed to private jet as sole form of transportation. That's also when the bulletproof van was being built, and then the private apartments in each continent for Dave. And, there's the concept within the Sea organization of being Fabian, meaning you can move around being undetected. David Miscavige was all about that. And that's where this strategy started, of spending millions of dollars on his apartments in every single continent and location so that nobody would ever know where he is. And, that's playing out today with process servers and so forth.
What were you going to say, Janis?
Yeah, I was just going to say on the bulletproof van, that was something Pat Broker got into, trying to get all LRH's cars bulletproofed. And Pat was like into this whole spy and espionage type of stuff that I personally, having known Hubbard for the 11 years I worked with him directly, I think that was all Pat. I don't think Hubbard was into that himself.
Interesting. David Miscavige, absolutely. Like I said, is hands down one of the most paranoid people I've ever met.
Yes.
I mean, my very first introduction, like the day that within a week of arriving into Religious Technology Center, was spending like 8 hours in a conference room with 20 top RTC executives. And it was just David Miscavige coming in and out, berating them about how they, Bob Champagne, who had been in Religious Technology Center, had been spying on David Miscavige's emails, allegedly. And oh my God, he was so mad. Berating,
he had access to the computer system, and he was reading through David Miscavige's files.
Yeah. As was happening too with the guy from Incom, the head of the computer organization, had also been doing
snooping
the same
in his files.
Yeah,
because they had Scientology loosely had their own computer network that via fiber and microwave transmission and receivers on all the different properties would send messages to each other. And then after Dave's stuff kept getting snooped in, they just switched over to encrypted regular email in the real world. But the other thing I wanted to say was that we talked about some of L. Ron Hubbard's houses in different places, and the houses that he still had, Dave wouldn't even stay in those houses because he considered them like shit. So he never stayed in the Bonneview house at the property because it wasn't something he even cared about. But at a certain point in the mid 90s, they ended up bulldozing the house that L. Ron Hubbard did have, which is kind of weird because all of the other houses that he stayed in, no matter where in his life, in Africa or in New Jersey, or Scientology ended up buying up a lot of those houses and making them and renovating them. But the house that was his at the international headquarters, they just bulldozed it and built him a whole new house that he never ever even stayed in. But in the end, you find out, it's because that house had an amazing guest house and a pool house and all these other amenities, a theater that David Miscavige used as his own after L. Ron Hubbard had been dead for 21 years. And it was sure that he was never coming back, because in 2007 was the date when Hubbard was supposed to show back up. like, hey, I'm done with my leave and I'm here. And that is the house where they were, this new mansion that was at the property was the house. And this was when I was still there in 2004, when I went through out this new house that it was still called BV, Bonnie View, or Beautiful View, but now it was a giant multi-million dollar mansion that was built for L. Ron Hubbard.
Right.
And when I was toured through that house by Annie Tidman, or broker, whatever you want to call her, Annie, they were setting his clothes out for the next day. When I was in that house, they were setting his clothes out. And these are the clothes that when he was from the 70s, when he was still wearing these, he was not a small dude. He was a big dude. And so they were setting his clothes out on there. And they were telling me, like, every season in this house, they changed the entire decor of the house. So in the fall,
that's so ridiculous.
In the fall, the drapes, the bedding, the pillows, the couch, all the fabrics, all of the tapestries are fall tapestries. And when we move into the next season, they have a storage building and they pull out the next season's things and they redecorate the entire house for the new season. And if you look at, there's drone footages and stuff of the property, but there are buildings that are just storage buildings for all of these things that they're going to swap out in the house. This is for a house that no one lives in. There's nobody living there. There's nothing happening. And they're doing all this work just in case this dude rolls in and's like, hey, I'm here. Oh, wait a minute. It's March. You have the winter or you have the summer decor up. What's going on?
You know, I've lost a little weight. I don't think those clothes are really going to fit me now.
That's what I would always tell people. I was like, how's a 21-year-old L. Ron Hubbard going to fit in a 72-year-old L. Ron Hubbard's clothes?
Well, the interesting thing on that is when Hubbard passed away, he'd actually been on an apple juice diet for a long time.
Yeah.
And so he was a scrawny little old man. He was no longer that big size. Yeah, that's what Annie had told me.
Oh, I didn't know this.
Yes.
Wow.
So all those clothes wouldn't have fitted him anyway. He would have had a whole new wardrobe.
Right.
You know.
But that's the thing.
But even so, and changing things per the season, you know, on the ship, we had the same red velvet curtains in his office for 8 years.
Yeah.
You know, and the same as his cabin or even other locations. That stuff never changed. The furniture never changed.
Yeah, it was wild. Yeah. And I'm just going to put this up here because this is from somebody who was in CST. I want to say Blow Drill. I want to say this is
Dylan.
Dylan,
hey,
right?
Dylan.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us.
He said household unit needed to keep their stats up somehow. Makes sense. Yeah.
Yes.
So there's a part of the CMO, the Commodore's messenger organization, at the international headquarters. There is a CMO organization that's just for that property. It's not for, it doesn't manage or do anything. It's called CMO Gold. And it was the CMO for Golden Era Productions. But within CMO Golden Era Productions, there was what was called a household unit. And those were the people that were assigned to work in that house. And I mean, these people are, if you were a lawnmower for the household unit, you had the same lawnmower as the lawnmower guy that was in Gold, but you only mowed the lawns that were on Hubbard's house or adjacent properties. So you would literally be mowing a lawn here, and on the other side of the road, somebody else would have to mow that lawn because they're not in the CMO and they're in Golden Era Production. It was like, this is the most inefficient setup I've ever seen in my life.
Mark, was Paco still there? Paco Suarez? Yeah, and he was LRH's steward. Yeah.
And Paco would tell stories. He was still in the household unit and he was still at the house. And it's funny that you say Paco. Paco was the one laying out the clothes. And Paco would tell stories about how he would get L. Ron Hubbard dressed. And I was like, what? He goes, he would lay his clothes out for him and run a bath, and he would help L. Ron Hubbard put his clothes on. And I'm going like, I'm like, what? And I'm thinking to myself, this is the most insane thing I've ever heard. But even when Paco was setting his clothes out at that time, it just was such an odd thing to me that I never knew the whole time I was at the base. I only found out about this in 2004. And I'm thinking to myself, why would they be laying out the clothes? It was just one of those things that I could never wrap my head around. Like it made no sense. And also pouring a bath. Like the dude can't turn a faucet and like start the bath for himself. Like, what are we talking about here? But in terms of other stuff that Dave had, he also had vehicles galore. Claire talked about the van. By the way, the van had the license plate of this bulletproof GMC. I think it was like a GMC Savannah that was just completely stripped, and they put lead in it, and they made bulletproof windows. They had like, I don't know what you call it, laminated windows, so bullet couldn't go through it.
Yeah.
But the license plate of that van was DFWM. And I saw it the first day it rolled into the property. It went into motor pool and it said the license plate. And I kind of went like, oh, are you kidding me? And then Yvonne, she used to be in Religious Technology Center until she tried to escape.
Gonzalez.
Yeah. And then she became a motor pool IC. She was in charge of fixing motorcycles and cars at the base. And she and John Brousseau were the one who had built this van, custom made this van for David Miscavige. As soon as it rolled in, I looked at the license plate and I was like, oh gosh. And she goes, you know what that means? And I was like, yeah, it says don't F with me. And she goes, how did you guess? And I was like, that seems just like something Dave would put on his license plate. Don't F with me. Mm-hmm. Anyway, but he had a Range Rover, like a brand new Range Rover. He had a Mazda Miata. He had multiple motorcycles. He had a TW 200. He had a TW 200 that was super, super modified by JB. He had a Harley Davidson motorcycle. He had, what other cars? He had at least one or two different BMWs. I think he had an 8 Series. He had a 7 Series. He had
he had a BMW given to him by ASI for Christmas one year. It was super high end. I don't remember which model it was, but
it was the 8 Series.
Yeah, but the organization paid for it and gave it to him, which was then a huge flap because of the inurement element that was documented because of where the money came from. So Barbara Ruiz, who was the head of ASI at the time, got in massive amounts of trouble for that. And it was then reverse engineered. So the staff were all given a bonus that divided out into the amount of the purchase price of the car. And then, they paid for that.
Yeah, instead of the organization, the staff of the organization paid for it.
Yeah.
Real briefly, Mark, I got to tell you that Mazda Miata, how he got that car was when I worked for him. We got a new car every year. The corporate liaison office and DM had like an Acura sedan, right? Anyway, I bought personally with some of the money that I got paid a Honda CRX in 1980. It was a 1986 Honda CRX. I bought it in 1988. It was a used car, right? But it was hot. It was fast. It was a little pocket rocket, 5-speed, that type of thing. And he hated that I had this car because, it was pretty fast. When we went to the movies, on RTC would go to the movies after staff meeting on Friday night. I would drive that. He didn't like it. Anyway, so he bought the Mazda Miata, which was this little red car. And I couldn't literally get into it. Yeah. It was so small. It's a Barbie and Ken doll movie. It should have been in the Barbie movie. That's how small this Miata was.
I was going to say, it's a chick car. Okay, it's a chick car. There's no way around it. Okay. Anyway, but Hubbard didn't have half the vehicle fleet that David Miscavige has. No. And also the other thing I wanted to say in terms of the food was that the entire time that I was there, Dave was very fond of sushi, and he would, on a regular basis, at least once a week, they would have sushi that was driven from Santa Monica on the coast of Los Angeles, that was driven to the property. And that's what he'd have for lunch, or that's what he'd have for dinner, or whatever, because we would see it in the fridge. And even if it was there, didn't mean he ate it. It just means that it was there in case he did. And right. So we would.
Did he eat
What's
with the
that?
staff?
No.
Did he eat with the staff
In
in the
the
dining room
very
in MCI?
early, in the very
Because
early
he did when he was
90s.
with us.
Yeah, in the
Yeah.
very early 90s, there was in MCI, there was the crew side and there was the officer side. And on the officer side, they had these really nice bay windows that overlooked the grass areas and all the lawns and all that. It was just a nice view. And his table was in the center of those three tables on the officer side. And that's where RTC executives sat and CMO executives sat. And for the first few years I was there, he wouldn't eat every meal, but he would at least eat there a few times a week. You'd see him in there, because when he showed up, everybody was on just a slightly different behavior than if he wasn't there eating. You know what I'm saying? Like, there was a foosball table on the officer side in the sort of lounge area by the coffee bar or whatever that was. And so if Dave was there, you didn't dare play foosball during lunchtime. But if Dave wasn't there, people would be playing foosball or just sleeping in the chairs in the lounge, to sleeping during a meal to get some sleep because they'd been there all night or whatever. But he also had his personal staff, I would say, was about 15 people. The entire time I was there, he had at least 15 people that were the only people they did anything for was David Miscavige. Between his communicator, his assistant, he had different communicators for different types of things. So he had COB communicator for compliance, which that person just went around and chased up orders that he had been given, that he had given people, and were they done with them. He had another person, which was COB communicator for traffic. And that was just the person that would oversee the communications that were coming in from. He
had one for incoming, one for out, like one person for incoming, one person for outgoing. Then he had his secretary. Then he had
transcripts, people that would just transcribe his.
Yes, exactly.
Whenever he would go somewhere, Larice, who was COB communicator, she would have a tape recorder. And if she wasn't there, then Shelly would have a tape recorder. And as soon as that meeting was over, they would literally pop the tape out and give it to somebody and pop a new tape in for the next meeting. And that tape would be rushed up to RTC and they would start transcribing it. So by the time he went to the next meeting or a meeting after the next meeting, there were already transcripts being printed and sent to your area of all the things that he talked about 2 hours ago. When he was there.
I'm so glad I left when I did. I'm so glad I left when I did. When I was there, it was me and one other person, and then there was a girl, Jackie, who was in the office, and then one person who handled their laundry and whatever other fare. So there was 4 of us to handle DM and Shelley's whatever they needed. That was it. And my job, obviously, I was into the organization doing stuff, not just dealing with his stuff, you know.
Yeah. Go ahead.
We did record when Hubbard would talk to people. We'd have a recorder going on that, but it was then just, you know, put in a file cabinet with all the others, but it was never transcribed and anything like that.
Oh, these and some of these meetings, that would be the other thing. Sometimes we would go to a meeting, and once the L. Ron Hubbard mansion was completed, then Building 50 was done after the BV, right? Or kind of around the same time, but it finished.
No, it was after. Yeah, Building 50 was definitely after.
So he had built a building as if RTC was hundreds of people. RTC was tens of people. It was never hundreds of people. I think at the most RTC had 30, 40 people. Claire?
No, it had been up to 50, but you're right. But the building was definitely designed to have like 200 staff in it.
Exactly.
Comfortably.
So this building he had built was called Building 50. It just happened to be the 50th building on that property that was built, and that's what we called it, Building 50. This building was, it ended up costing like 30 million plus in the end with all the redos and everything like that. But we would go up to a meeting at this building, and we would sit in the courtyard, and he had set the courtyard up as a giant conference room. The courtyard could fit 200 people just in that one place. And he would have tables set up in a big giant U. And then we'd go up there for a meeting. Sometimes we would wait, like we're talking about 30, 40 executives from all over the property. We would sit up there and wait for 2 hours, just sitting at tables. And it would just be like, yeah, there's nobody to say like, hey, is he coming? You're not going to say that. You just wait. And then when he would come, he would yell at us for how we hadn't gotten anything done all day, and how when he had met with us yesterday and nothing was done. And we'd be like, dude, we've been waiting here for you the whole day. How are we going to go and do stuff if we're sitting here waiting for you? And yesterday, we were in other meetings with you on other stuff that has nothing to do with this stuff, and that's why we didn't do any of that stuff either. And that meeting,
So no one would say that out loud.
oh yeah, you would never say that,
Right.
but that's what's going on. That's the thought bubble. Like, what? But so let's say we got there at 1 o'clock for the meeting, and he showed up at 3. That meeting could go to 9 o'clock that night. And we would sit there and listen to him yell at us for 3 or 4 hours, or however long it was. And then he'd give us, a week's worth of work to have done by tomorrow. And then by the time you got back to your workspace after the meeting, he was already in another space. And if you happened to also have something to do with that space, then you were right back into another meeting with him for the rest of the night. And you couldn't even have relayed the things that you needed done from the last meeting that you were at. You have to tell all your people, okay, we got to do this and we got to do that. We got to change this. Don't do this anymore. Dave doesn't like that. You got to do it this way. We got to do it this way. You couldn't even do that before you'd have to end up in another
He's
meeting.
psychotic.
Yeah.
We could see it at the time. I mean, he used to do that, but not to that extreme. He always would bypass. But, one of the Hubbard policies was you don't bypass the senior of an area and go directly order his juniors to do things, because you just cross order everything. And he would do it on a daily basis,
And he would also invariably, he would contradict something that he had told us to do at another time.
Right.
So when you would have to, he would say, you got to do this or you got to do that. I'm going to just add Claire back in here. She added herself, but there it is. So he would say, like, paint this black. And then there'd be a transcript about all this other stuff. And in there it'd say, oh, you got to make sure you paint it black. And then he'd be in another meeting and he'd go, you know what? I know you guys were going to paint that thing white. I think you should paint it blue. And you're like, well, you told us to paint it black. And then you'd be like, well, now we're totally screwed, because now we have something saying to paint it black and we have something to say to paint it blue. And he thinks that we were going to paint it white. We never talked about white. He's the only person who's ever said white. And so then when you're answering him, he has this army of people that are comparing your answer to everything he's wrote. And he says, well, right here, he said that you guys were supposed to paint it black. Did you ever paint it black? And we're like, well, no, but we couldn't even get the paint. By the time we got the black paint, he said to paint it blue. And so then you're like, well, now I got to get a PO or finances approved to do blue. And you're like, no, he said in here, you're supposed to do black. Why are you painting it blue? It's like, well, he said here to paint it blue. And they're like, well, which one is it? You'd be like, oh my God. And this is the kind of, when we're doing this series on my channel called The Spy Files. And we did a bunch of spy files that had to do with Scientology and OSA trying to mess with us. And now we're doing all these ones where they're talking about Tom Cruise. But you see people are writing back and they're arguing over this. And he's saying, I told you to do this and you didn't do it. And the amount of time that's wasted and spent on Dave talking and people talking to Dave and him yelling at them for not doing, that's thousands and thousands of Sea Org hours a week are just dedicated to dealing with interfacing with David Miscavige. And that's the thing to me, where if Scientologists knew this, their money, when they give Scientology $1,000, about 500 that's going to Dave. And the other 500 is split through the rest of Scientology. And if they realize that Dave himself is spending millions and millions and millions of dollars and also wasting millions and millions of dollars,
Yeah.
then maybe they wouldn't give Scientology that money, because it's not being spent to help anyone really at the end of the day. It's
Right.
it's just going to support David Miscavige. He's the only Sea Org member who lives better than a president of a country. You know what I'm
Yes.
saying?
Right.
And Sea Org members, most Sea Org members don't know this. Certainly most Scientologists don't know this. And I think the only people that would even have an inkling of it is people that aren't in Scientology, because they know that's how the world works. The guy who's the boss is the one making all the money. When you're in the
Right.
Sea Org, you just think all Sea Org members are built the same and are
Yeah.
treated the same, and there's no big deal. And when you're in David Miscavige's sphere, you're like, no, this dude has unlimited funds for whatever he wants. Like when he's like, oh, I was snowmobiling with Tom Cruise in Alaska last week, you know you're not the same as David Miscavige. Okay?
Right. Don't forget the swimming with turtles and all
Yeah,
of that stuff.
exactly.
But also too, let's not forget the parallel in relation to Hubbard and David Miscavige vanishing their wives.
Yes.
Yeah, that's true. He
Yes,
did do the
yes.
same exact when Janis was talking about the separate bedrooms. I was like, yeah, that's interesting. I mean,
Yeah.
Claire and I were on different schedules too, Janis, but we didn't have separate bedrooms. Okay.
Right. Right.
We just were lucky to ever be in the bedroom at the same time for a long time.
I
But,
wasn't waking her up and she wasn't waking me up because we weren't ever sleeping.
No.
And we weren't ever at our house.
right. But speaking of banishing, when Hubbard was in Sparks, Mary Sue was still at La Quinta, and she was actually in charge running the base. And I'll tell you, it was wonderful. We had sane schedules. We had time off. It was great. There was the stress and pressure wasn't there. And then Hubbard wanted to come back, and he would not come back while Mary Sue was there because he felt she was a danger. So she had to be set up in Los Angeles with her own place, which he apparently bought for her, and moved before he would even return to La Quinta.
Wow. So what year was Mary Sue moved to the house? It was in Los Feliz, right?
Yeah, well, he returned January 5th, 1978. So it was the end of 77 that she was being moved down there.
Wow. And so 77 until
Yeah.
when she passed away.
But he did see her a few times in between, because she would come up to the Gold Base and meet him up
Yeah,
at
we have photos of
Bonneview.
it.
Yeah, they would meet at Bonneview for like family birthday parties and things like that. And also before she was going to prison, he had her come up because he did a whole photo shoot of her to document how she looked before she went into prison. In case she was abused while she was in there, he wanted to be able to show that she was totally fine before she went in.
Thanks, honey. I appreciate that.
Wow.
Right.
That's creepy.
So,
And also, Janice, didn't they write to each other almost on a daily basis too?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, they did. But after he took off with Pat and Annie, I don't know if that continued, but beforehand they wrote each other every single day. And the messengers, after the raid, she kept talking about her lawsuit and bad news. So he had the messengers, we had to go through and vet what she wrote him and retype. We'd attach the original, but we'd retype it without the bad news in it and give that to him. And then he would then dictate an answer and would sit there and type it up. But every day they wrote back and forth. After 1980, when he left, I don't know how that worked.
Wow.
And either way, she was kept in isolation until she died in 2002.
Right.
And with dedicated handlers to keep her, I'm presuming.
Spies.
Yeah,
Basically
there were
take care of her,
spies reporting
reporting
on her. Yes.
Right. Similar to what Shelley has.
Yes.
With, at least 3 staff dedicated only to being at her side 24/7, plus, obviously security guards and whatever else.
Wow.
And she knew Neville was reporting on her all the time.
Yeah, Neville
She
Potter,
knew, she
right?
knew that. Yeah.
Who also
Neville,
works at
yes.
Author Services.
Yep.
Yes.
What was his wife's name? Is it Leslie?
Leslie.
Leslie
and Neville
escaped
Potter.
and then was brought back at some point.
Oh, wow.
I don't know that she's still there or not, but Neville definitely is, I'm sure.
Okay, I think this is a good point to do a few questions. If you guys want, we can
Oh,
do.
yeah,
Q&A.
absolutely.
We
Let's
like
do
to
it.
do, and we are going to do a merch giveaway at the end of this stream. So we'll do that. We're just going to randomly pick somebody. We're not going to use the fancy StreamYard thing. We're just going to do bullseye, hit a comment.
Please subscribe to the channels too.
Yes. Oh, that's right. We've got, if you guys are watching on the Blown for Good channel, please go over to our Scientology Stories, Peeling the Onion. Is that the right name of the channel?
Yeah, we're actually thinking about shorting it, but that is the name. Yeah.
Okay, good. Go to our Scientology Stories, Peeling the Onion, and subscribe to Mark and Janis. And if you're watching on Mark and Janis's channel, come on over to the Blown for Good channel. Hit like and subscribe over here too. But we've got a whole bunch of questions starred. I'm going to put them up, and I'm going to let Claire read them because Claire and Janis and Mark and I have been doing the most amount of talking. So I think we should get some Claire talking.
I'm sorry, Claire.
That's all right. It's
Okay, here we go.
All good. I ain't say that.
that.
This seems easy. Hubbard died rich and had the cult stable. Dave didn't earn his position, didn't modernize the cult, and made it a viral laughingstock. Yep, that's true.
Yeah.
There you go. We knew that I ain't say that.
That sums it up.
Summed it up perfectly. And that's also before the video started. They wrote that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you. I ain't say that. Japan of Green Gables.
Japan at Green Gables. Question: is it just a coincidence that David Miscavige's family in the Sea Org had high-ranking positions, or was it nepotism? Good question.
They didn't really have high-ranking positions. I wouldn't say Ron Sr. was a high position.
Ronnie.
No, Ronnie Miscavige and Biddy, his wife, were.
Yeah, but Biddy was already a senior executive before she married Ronnie.
I was going to say Biddy was already a rock star before David Miscavige. I don't think had anything to do with her rise to power.
Yeah,
right.
I think
Ronnie was the deputy commanding officer of the Commodore's Messenger Org in Clearwater under Mike Rinder. Well, Dave was up being just a cameraman, so it wasn't. There was no connection there. But later on, yes, he brought him in as marketing exec int.
That's right.
And to be clear, Miscavige is the only one left of his family in the Sea organization. He doesn't have a single brother, sister, mother, father, anything that has anything to do with the Sea Org. And whatever peripheral family members that are still left, they ain't Blue Star or Gold Star Scientologists either. No. So I think he constantly complained about his mother because she was always doing things that would reflect poorly on him. And the same with Denise, his twin sister. He was always complaining about how they're bad PR for him.
Janis, tell a story about his mother not calling him sir. Tell that story real quick.
Well, actually, when he was a kid, she used to call him Little Hitler because of his attitude and nastiness. And, he'd try and start fights, and Ronnie would then have to finish the fights or clean things up. But there was a time a bunch of us were going skiing up at Big Bear. And Loretta came with us, and there was Dave and Shelley, myself and Paul, Ray Midoff and Gelda, and Rick and Vicky. And we're going up there, and Dave is getting mad at his mother because she's not calling him sir. And he was like, pull over. And, he then insists on, Loretta, you come with me, and takes her into the restaurant, and he's in there arguing with her. She still wouldn't call him sir. And she wasn't Sea Org.
Yeah.
Right.
Ron Miscavige told me that when he was little, they called him, when they first got into Scientology and they were learning the terms, they learned the term en theta, which means in turbulated
Enrique.
theta.
Right.
It just means
In,
somebody who's
yeah.
just angry all the time, en theta.
Right.
And they used to call him Enrique en theta. That was his
That's right.
actual nickname, was Enrique en theta. And I always, when Ron Miscavige Sr. told me that, I thought, that is the best nickname for that dude that I've ever heard. Enrique
Yeah.
en theta. Okay, blow drill. This is Dylan. He says, I built the LRH houses up at CST and no clothing was set out. Yeah,
Right.
as far as I understand, because I asked about that as well, because they have L. Ron Hubbard offices all over the world. And they also have these L. Ron Hubbard houses all over the world. And some of them are at these CST locations. There is a house there. So if L. Ron Hubbard needs to hide out with all his materials, there's a house there to do it. They're not setting out clothes at those places because the dude only had so many clothes, and all of those are at the main house, the BV. BV is the mothership of the L. Ron Hubbard houses, if as you were. Okay, let's do another comment. Okay, Claire, I'm going to turn it back over to you to read.
Okie dokie. Gary Jackson Moorhead. I used to walk into Bonnie View all the time when on watch and watched the clothes and shoes being laid out, getting washed, and his huge closet with all the platform shoes, boots, belts, ascots, etc.
Yeah,
There you go.
it was the 70s. That's the truth. All those clothes were pretty much 70s clothes that I saw.
Yeah.
Gary Jackson Moorhead again. He had tab and cactus coolers in the fridge at BV. Oh,
Okay. Now, I'm not a big fan of Tab, but you give me a cactus
Oh, yeah.
cooler and I'm right on board with that kind of
Yeah, yeah.
that
Sugary,
green
but
and
it's
kind of
good, yeah.
oranges, kind of with the little cactus. Oh my goodness, I love me a cactus cooler.
Yep. Jason Polychron, video idea. What law enforcement agencies have you worked with to expose Scientology, L. Ron Hubbard? How did it go? How were you treated? Yes, there you go. Current, yeah, that's a great video idea. Over the ages, current stuff, we're not at liberty to speak about everything specifically.
The experience that I've personally had with law enforcement has been positive in terms of Scientology. I haven't had any bad experiences with law enforcement in regards to dealing with Scientology that I can think of right offhand. The only thing is there is a little bit of frustration in how they deal with and act on the information that we provide them. The wheels, what do they say? The wheels of justice seem to turn very slowly. That's what I'll say.
Yeah. Dr. Nova, at what point did Hubbard's mind finally break and he began his slide into totally believing his own bull? Because it would seem, at least at the beginning, that he still understood it was a scam.
That's a hard question for us
Well,
to answer.
yeah, I know that when we were on the ship in the 60s and the 70s, he believed in what he was doing. Who else would stay up all night till 6 or 8 in the morning, case supervising folders and directing people on what to do, to how to help people? I mean, this is his opinion, that he was helping people. And this is a person who didn't go off to the movies. He, maybe a month or two, he might go for a car drive or a motorbike ride. But everything he did was to market Scientology, to come up with trying to help people. And he didn't do other things, like Miscavige. He's off, scuba diving here and doing whatever and just having a grand old time but trying to make people think he's working.
Right.
Where Hubbard was working to enhance Scientology. And I believe he believed in what he was doing.
Yeah. I think Hubbard
may not agree
believed
with
it
what
to
he was
the very
doing,
end.
but I believe that he believed it too. He believed what he was doing up to the day he died, to the point where he had CST set up with all the vaults and the this and the that. I mean, yeah, you could say he was crazy about that. Was crazy, but he definitely believed what he was doing.
Yeah, I don't think Miscavige believes in what
No.
he's doing. I think he just wants to have the money and the power. And if he has to play along and pretend that all the Scientology stuff is real, then that's not a big price to pay to be able to live like a king until
No, I
doesn't.
just read in Mitch's book about the ideal orgs that he had this bright idea. Oh, if we build all these real estate these orgs, people will magically come once we have these palaces built.
Right.
I mean, that is so delusional.
Yeah.
I mean, Mitch writes the whole story about the whole thing. I'm going like, what are you going to build it and they will come? I mean, this is not Field of Dreams.
And
It's ridiculous,
and to be fair, Hubbard said not to do that.
Right.
Exactly.
He said that he said, if you want to grow Scientology, don't do the things that David Miscavige has been doing since David Miscavige took
And
over.
Hubbard's, as a manager, Hubbard's main viewpoint was value of services delivered. How much backlog services have not been delivered? All he cared about was delivery. He didn't care about the income as much as the delivery, because he knew if he didn't deliver, people would not continue to be Scientologists and you wouldn't grow, Anyway,
Yeah.
I'm not saying it's right,
Yeah.
but I'm just saying he
Yeah.
was dedicated to expanding.
Yep.
Yeah.
Witness. Wow. Sounds like a high stress job for a kid. Yeah.
I think that one came in when Janis
What you were
was
talking about as
standing
a
up,
kid.
ready to go on to watch.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah. Seriously. Jenny, are Amy and Matt okay? They have been absent from YouTube for a while. Yes.
I think they posted a notice on their community tab on their channel. They moved, so
Yes.
they had
Yes.
They
to,
bought a new house.
yeah. So I think once they get all settled into their new place, then or just keep track on their channel if you want to know what they're doing on their channel. That's probably the best place to find it.
But they're definitely
they're
okay.
doing good.
Thanks for asking. Metalhead, has David Miscavige ever claimed to have any superhuman abilities? That's common among cult leaders.
no, he has asthma.
I will
He
tell
has
you
the
what-
superhuman ability to frequently physically abuse staff. That's for
He holds
sure.
on to copper
Yeah.
rods in the ground.
Yeah,
Oh my
when I was at the base at the Golden Era Productions for many years, when I was first there, I was on the night shift, and I tell this story in my book, Blown for Good: Behind the Iron Curtain of Scientology. That one time I was doing shredding, or we were going to mid-rats, the midnight rations meal in the middle of the night, and as we were walking to the dining hall from where our production space, we saw David Miscavige in what was called, at that time, it was called the Cine Lodges. And it was these kind of bungalows that were right next to the dining hall that used to be like little apartments, and they turned them into
Where I
offices.
lived. I used to
I
live
lived down there too.
You live near the talent? Where did you
right
live?
next to MCI. As a matter of fact, the talent office was Julie and my
There you go.
birthing. That was
I
my
remember
bedroom.
that.
Yeah.
I remember hearing that's where you.
I was on the
Other
other
side.
side, the parking lot side. The
So
very
Closest
first
to
one next
MCI.
to
Closest to
MCI.
MCI.
That one became the
Which-
art department.
Yeah.
Anyway, so the cinematography division moved into all these bungalows, and when we were walking down to go eat one night, we saw David Miscavige. He was in there, but he was by himself. He didn't have his entourage. He was just in there, and he was digging through the drawers, and we thought, that's weird. And then it was just him, and we kind of paused and we looked, and it's like, oh, it's chairman of the board in there doing something. Anyway, so then we go eat. Well, then we would work until the morning, and then after breakfast, we would go home and we'd sleep all day, and then we'd come home we'd get back to work at dinner time, everyone else's dinner time, which would be our proper breakfast and blah, blah, blah. Anyway, as soon as we get to the base, we have dinner, and then there's a crew muster, and it's a big flap. Supposedly, David Miscavige walked in to the cine division in the middle of the day, and he was doing like a surprise inspection, and he pointed to like the third drawer of one of the Sea Org members' desks and said, open up that drawer right there. And they opened it up, and there was a pair of shoes, like a really nasty, stinky, like just gags smelling shoes in there. And there was a bunch of other junk, deodorant, which you would never put in your desk drawer. That's like a sin in the Sea Org. And people were like, Dave, Mr. Miscavige he's like OT. He knew exactly which drawer had the dirty shoes in it. And they're telling these stories, and I'm thinking to myself, oh, this MFer, he stacked the deck last night. He went through the whole place. He looked through every single drawer, and he just had to remember which one had the shoes in it. And he comes in the next day with the whole entourage and everybody, and just cherry picks one drawer out of the whole place. And this happened all the time with him over the 15 years we were at the base, where he would just magically find stuff. And I would always think, yeah, well, if you can go through someone's, because he lived on the property. Most other people who worked at that property, they lived at apartments nearby in town. So he's the only one who could just, and he was on his own schedule. So he could stay up till 6 o'clock in the morning digging through desks if he wanted to, and then come in the afternoon the next day and show up for work. So anyway, those were the superpowers that he had, for whoever asked that question.
OBG Foster question: was everybody more relaxed whenever LRH was away?
Yes.
Yeah. Same with David Miscavige, for sure.
Yeah, when Dave would bug out, we'd be like, party.
Yeah, well, I don't know about party, but it certainly wasn't. You wouldn't be worried if you were going to be sent to the rehabilitation project force that day.
Yeah, but we're not staying up all night to do work for somebody who ain't even there.
Yes, exactly. Japan of Green Gables. I bet if someone saved over Miscavige's save file on the N64, they'd be sent to the rehabilitation project force.
Well, to be fair, this is a super geeky comment, but when David Miscavige would play Nintendo, he loved Super Mario's, by the way. He was the biggest Super Mario Brothers fan I've ever seen. So much so that one time, and Claire may remember this, one time in the early 1990s, the whole property was supposed to go, or people that were allowed to, went up to Big Bear for a ski trip. And I got sent up 2 days earlier to set up these audiovisual systems I was telling you about. I had to set one of those up at a ski lodge up in Big Bear. And I had to get a Nintendo with Super Mario Brothers and all the games he liked. And I had to set up a whole TV and speakers and cassette deck and all this other stuff, so that when he got there, that Super Mario Brothers was warmed up and ready to go for him. Oh boy.
Japan of Green Gables. El Cadiz nuts. Sorry, couldn't resist.
What is going on with the comments today? Here we go.
Cheyenne Calkins. Wasn't Hubbard also against donations for nothing in exchange? Seems that's the main thing for David Miscavige. Yep.
Yes.
Completely.
It was.
Plus, he was against events.
Yeah.
Yep.
Pretty much everything. Don't build buildings to be nice. You don't have to have a nice building. You just have to deliver the way
and have it clean.
Yeah, have a clean, nice building. And any Scientologists that's been in Scientology for the last 30 or 40 years, they'll tell you they used to go to an organization. Their local organization was in a strip mall, and they were busting at the seams, and there was tons of people there, and the parking lot was full, and blah, 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 blah. And today they've got a palatial mansion that used to be a museum, and there's 3 cars in the parking lot, and that's the most there ever is.
Yep.
Right.
Exactly.
OBG Foster question: does David Miscavige make a point of telling people about his luxury trips? Yes, to the staff at the base. Sometimes he would put up displays of photos and but
didn't he do a slideshow?
Yes, he did.
To call it a slideshow is a misnomer. It was Ben-Hur, the slideshow. It was like a 3-hour underwater fishing slideshow that we all had to watch. And it had a music score. The slideshow had a freaking music score. Okay. This was us.
I had to watch him. I had to watch him skydiving with Tom Cruise. He came home with a video and showed it to us in his office.
Yeah.
And so by my recollection, the only purpose that he gave in showing us these trips was to show that he was a complete professional in everything he touched. Do you remember a different message, Mark?
I think I slept through most of his presentations, but to tell you the truth, I think that was his excuse for making us watch a 3-hour underwater fish slideshow that he had produced and took pictures of. But the worst part is that we had almost all the stuff he used was stuff that the Sea Org members bought him for his birthday. So
Right.
all I
That's-
remembered was that's where my $40 went from my pay, is so that I could see a freaking clownfish in Aruba. You know, like I was sort of like, I would have rather have had the 20 or $40. Okay.
which was paid for by donations to the IAS.
Yeah.
Right, because he used IAS funds for that.
Yep. No, he was definitely a shady character. Oh, here's one from Jackson.
Gary Jackson Moorhead. I used to hang with Paco at Bonnie View all the time. He told me a lot of stories. I bet he did.
Yeah, Paco has all kinds of stories. I would say at least half of them took place.
I
Matt
agree
Denny.
with that statement.
No, yeah.
Question.
Paco was a storyteller, and sometimes he ventured off from the truth path a little.
Okay,
Well,
then.
Paco was an assistant steward. He was not the one that helped LRH get dressed. The messengers did that.
Mm.
Oh, but somebody really did help him get dressed, though.
Oh, yes.
Oh my goodness!
Yes.
Wow.
Yep. All right, Matt Denny. Question. How did Dave stage his coup? How did he manage to wrestle control from Pat and Annie Broker?
I think we kind of led into
Kind of covered it, but we also have a video on our channel, our Scientology Stories Peeling the Onion, that covers that exact story from beginning to end. So if you go to our
Perfect.
channel and look under, I have it on a playlist on David Miscavige, Tom Cruise, and Shelley, and
Mhm.
it'll be on there.
Okay, we'll put a link to that in the description so you guys can see that as well if you want to just click on it. Okay, we got a few more questions left here. Let's see what we got him up. I don't think that you said you cut his crackers. You would just open the can for him for the corned beef.
Yeah, but there'd be crackers that we would get, and we'd cut up cheese to go
Okay.
on the crackers.
Okay,
Mark, you
good.
could have had a job as an assistant messenger licking the crackers.
Oh,
Licking the
that-
crackers.
as soon as you said the word cracker, I knew I was in for it. As soon as you said cracker liquor, I was like, oh, here we go. Here
Yeah.
we go, everybody. Good job. Mark wasn't around. He would have licked those crackers so fast.
Oh my goodness. Yep.
Yeah. As soon as you said crackers, I was like, you really just had to say crack. You could have said cookies or sweets.
Anything
They
but
were
crackers.
Yeah.
Susan B. at Blown for Good. All my sweat merch has come in handy this winter. So warm and cozy. Yes, nice.
Nice.
Thank you, Susan. E. Dunbar. Question. Do you think Crazy Davy is paranoid because he knows it's all BS and he has to keep the game going? LRH probably believed it was real. No paranoia. Yeah, I'd agree with that
I
assessment.
agree.
Yeah. Also,
I think that David Miscavige has Hubbard trumped in terms of his capacity to weasel and strategize himself into power, bully anyone else that was a threat out of the picture completely, bully the IRS into giving Scientology tax exempt status, and then continuing to amass millions of dollars while weaseling himself further and further out of the public eye and doing everything he can to now, I think, make Scientologists believe he's the reason everything is wonderful.
That's right.
that's probably pretty accurate.
Yeah. Susan B. Oh my God, to think Tom Cruise and David Miscavige are friends is a pretty lonely life, or I don't know, Scientology needs to be gone. Pure evil this man is. Yep, absolutely. That sums it up.
He's actually the one who's chasing more people out of there than anybody.
Yep.
Mhm.
Catherine Olson, most Sea Org members where I was think David Miscavige is some sort of amazing OT, operating Thetan, who knows everything. Yes, that he has superpowers, that he is the penultimate Scientologist.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm not going to try and read that name. I cannot tell the panel here how important all this information about this cult for those of us who don't know. Well, thank you. Thanks for joining us and thanks for being here. Japan of Green Gables. Question. Who replaced Marty as IG Ethics when he was promoted to total IG? Marty became IG, at least Inspector General, in 1998. And by that time, David Miscavige had eliminated the IG Ethics Inspector General for Ethics position. So by that time, nobody did.
Yeah. It was just COB and IG That's all
Yep.
there was left.
Oh,
And
okay.
then eventually he got rid of the IG too. So there was no inspector general, just COB, and then a bunch of people that worked in RTC. So
Yep.
he actually ended up getting rid of the stopgaps that were in his own organization to make sure that there was not one person controlling everything, as he did with all of the other organizations.
Yeah, and just
So-
to add one comment to that, the IG position became Deputy Inspector General because David Miscavige said, well, he is Inspector General. COB
Yeah.
and Inspector General
Yeah.
are one and the same position, is what the final analysis was by the time we got the heck out of there.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I think we did a good job answering questions, and I think we did a good job talking about all the stuff and all the toys these two guys had to play with.
Yeah.
And I want to say that of the two cult leaders, I think L. Ron Hubbard came out on top. He was genuinely invested, and he really thought he was doing what he thought he was doing. And I do agree with the sentiment that David Miscavige is just kind of playing along so he can enjoy the benefits of what happened. And it also doesn't seem like an accident that he ended up being the one in charge. He was
Right.
thinking
Planned it.
and striving for this the entire time. Once he got the idea, he was a man on a mission to make this happen. And even when he was thwarted from time to time, he was somehow overcame it, somehow, some way.
Master manipulator, that's for sure.
Yeah. Oh, there's one other thing. I'm looking. No, I think we're good. Okay. So do we want to do, if you want to do a giveaway, should we do a giveaway? If you want to just say merch or book me or, whatever you want. We have a setup on Blown for Good where if you want something from the Blown for Good merch store, you just have to tell us, and you send Claire or write in through the Blown for Good website, and then Claire will just send you a link, and you can pick out what you want, if it's a book or a sweater or a mouse pad or a mug or whatever, and you just get sent it.
Yep. Well, they have to pick the item first and then send me the link. But yeah, that
We'll give
works.
you a link to get it for nothing.
Yes, there we go.
So we'll
Let's
give
do it.
everybody a few minutes. Thanks for joining us. Again, if you haven't subscribed to our Scientology stories, Peeling the Onion, head on over there, give them a like and a subscribe over on their channel. That always helps. We don't, none of us does this for a living, but we could be doing other things, if you know what I mean. So when we get a little like and a little subscribe and, you help the channel, maybe get some merch or something, that it gives us a little bit more incentive to do this.
Right.
Because, I could just be sitting up watching football right now. I don't have to be here doing this.
What were you going to say, Janis?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that next Saturday night at 5:00, I am going to be downtown Clearwater.
Oh,
So, yeah. So if anyone wants to come and meet me, chat with me, ask any questions, or even bring their books and have me sign them, my books that I wrote, I'll be there 5:00 next Saturday.
someone shows up
Nice.
with a copy of Ben-Hur. They're like, Janice, can you sign my book?
Right.
All right. Well, we got a bunch of merch comments. You going to pick
yeah.
someone, honey?
Sure, I'll pick one. Here we go. We're
Okay.
going to do it.
5, 4,
There you
3,
go.
2,
Calm down.
1.
Oof, what do we got? Oh, Matt Denny. Has he won before?
Nope. I don't believe
wow.
so.
There
I
you
don't
go,
believe
Matt. He's
so.
a frequent flyer. Throw a Brit of bone. Merch me.
Yes, definitely. There you go. So, Matt, send me an email, claire@blownforgood.com, and let me know what you would like. Congratulations.
Nice. Okay, you want to do one more, and then we'll
Yes.
close this. We'll shut this party down.
Yes.
Okay, here we go. And skadoosh.
Love Food Kitchen.
Kitchen.
Janice.
No,
No, I'd like to sign my books.
Yeah, that's not.
All right, Love Food Kitchen. Well, Janice is not, she's in a different state than us, so that's not going to work. But whatever you'd like, congratulations, you win something. Just
Yeah.
let me know what you would like.
Okay, guys, I think we did it. I think
Awesome.
we're going to shut this thing down. Thanks for everybody who joined, and thanks for everybody who watched. Claire and I are going to do another live tomorrow, and we are going to do that right around the same time, I think. So if there's not already a notice up on the channel, we'll put one up so you can if you click the bell notification, it'll tell you when we go live, so you know. So if you're watching or doing something else, then you get a little notice. But let me take this comment down.
Someone has just asked where. So this is probably in reference to my downtown Clearwater. There's 3 restaurants there that are non-Scientology owned. Downtown Pizza, Tequila, and something else. Anyway, I'm going to have dinner probably at Tequila, and that's where they can probably find me.
We'll post a notice too on our YouTube channel, you know, the community tab. Janice, when you know where you're going to be, we'll just post it there so people know where it is.
Yeah.
Stay safe, Janice. Stay safe.
Yeah. And don't announce it too far ahead of time, because then they'll know where they'll do their work. We had an event where we went to Clearwater. A whole bunch of us went down to Clearwater to have a whole bunch of people show up, and Scientology made it so we couldn't go to any restaurant in downtown. They turned us away saying, "Oh, we don't have enough tables for your group," or "We don't have this," and we were just like, "Really? Oh my gosh, guys!" Okay.
Well, the place is dead, but it was dead when we moved there in '75. It was dead then too.
Yeah.
Okay, guys. Well, thanks a lot. That was fun. That was a different video. We don't normally do videos like this. So this was great. And thanks again.
We love doing it.
Thanks, everybody.
Yes.
We'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for watching. If you'd like to help support the channel, feel free to check out the merch store link in the description. We have Hail Xenu, Xenu is my homeboy, and BFG branded mouse pads, shirts, mugs, all sorts of other stuff in there that helps us to bring you new content on a regular basis. You can also pick up a copy of my book, Blown for Good, Behind the Iron Curtain of Scientology, in hardback, Kindle, and Audible versions as well. There's also a link to our podcast, and you can get that on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you'd like to watch another video, you can click on this link right here, or you can click on this one here, or you can click on the subscribe button right here. Thanks a lot. Until next time.